And hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, Hobbit lads and lasses, you have dialed into the OneRing.net. Welcome back to our weekly live stream called Torn Tuesday. My name is Clifford Broadway, nicknamed Quickbeam on the website, friend of all the Ents and Shepherd, youngling Shepherd. This is our show. We are here to talk about music, fantastic music of Howard Shore and his extensions of his Lord of the Rings themes and this amazing, successful blending of music and cinema with special guests joining us. It's a movie watch along. So get your Blu-ray player ready, get your DVD player ready, or your Apple iTunes file, whatever you've got, and set it up. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to be joined by Jim Ware and Doug Adams. Jim Ware, frequent collaborator and business partner with Doug Adams, who everybody knows, who writes all the liner notes, works with Howard Shore and writes these beautiful liner notes on the music soundtracks for The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogies. And he's also the author of the music of the Lord of the Rings. And Doug, tell us in a quick second about The Hobbit, the music of The Hobbit, that is just waiting to be published, waiting to happen. Tell us about it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm on my other screen over here. I have open to the music of the Hobbit films, which is a book that does exist, but it only exists on my computer. And I think Jim's also. But this was something that we did shortly after the films came out. I was lucky enough to sort of be a fly on the wall for the Hobbit films, even more than I was a fly on the wall for the Lord of the Rings films. Yeah, so I'm going to share some of the revelations tonight. We'll hold a couple of things in check at the same time, but I know there's a lot of interest in these scores, and we haven't really talked about them in the manner that we talked about Lord of the Rings. We had a lot of time to sort of dig into those, so we're going to dig into The Hobbit tonight.
The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where you get your DVD players. This is your final warning, and then we're going to do a countdown and begin the film all together, okay? There will be a countdown clock. You'll see it. So if you come into our broadcast later on in the live stream at any time, or if you're watching on YouTube on the archive later on, please join us there and subscribe, hit that like button, and watch all of our weekly episodes of Torn Tuesday on the OneRing.net. But ladies and gentlemen, The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. I have my file on my Blu-ray on the pause screen just at the very beginning of the Warner Brothers logo. And I'm going to wait for the countdown from Mission Control, from Justin, who is there behind the curtain. And we're going to talk about the brilliance of Howard Shore. And this is going to be a deep dive. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Doug and Jim. Ladies and gentlemen, let us begin. Countdown, Justin. Play.
There we go. So I guess we're going to get right into this. This is very unusual for me. It's like a marathon. At the beginning here, we have an opening phrase, and this doesn't seem very important at this point. This theme will eventually develop into something very important in the Desolation of Smaug. So we'll talk about that one soon, I guess in a couple of nights. But you're also going to hear, I'm just talking about a phrase shape there. You're going to hear on top of this a lion, of course, but you're going to hear a string line where you keep hearing a sharp 4 resolve to a 5, an F natural moving to an F sharp and things like that, which is all very much references to the History of the Ring theme. So Howard did a lot of that in these scores, where he would sort of hint at certain ideas and certain textures without really fully getting into them. And of course, sometimes you hear the themes, right between the eyes. So this is the good old Shire theme as we get into The Hobbit, back in its clarinet setting. Here comes Bilbo. This is a learning experience for all. Well, you guys have done this before. I've never done this before. I feel like I'm talking over people rudely.
We hear the Shire theme just over the credit. When it was the Lord of the Rings credit, we heard a very different theme.
Yeah, we heard the History of the Ring for most of those, although a lot of times they would kind of do what would be the main theme of each individual film. And the Hobbit films do that a bit as well. You'll get a nice big blast of the Smaug theme in the next film. So this is the scene when I started working on these films. I went to go visit Howard Shore's office October in the year this was released. So the film was partially complete, not entirely complete. And this was the scene that they had paused on the screen as I walked into the office, having not seen, other than the teaser trailer, not seeing a frame of The Hobbit, certainly not hearing a note of it anywhere. And this was very exciting to come in and see, you know, it was very perfect to see Bilbo back on the screen, his theme and all that. So we're going to move on into Erebor here, aren't we?
We are indeed. And this is one of those areas where keen-eared listeners might note that this is not quite what's on the soundtrack album. This is one of those pieces where things were changed after the album was finished. The prologue itself was one of the not the latest, but one of the later pieces to be recorded, I think, in sort of mid-October 2012.
Yeah, quite right. So here's the first bit of the Erebor theme. It's a 6-note theme. In this case, I think it's A, C, A, D, A, E. It kind of shapes a mountain peak very appropriately. There's some other stuff in here that's sort of subtle. There are certain ideas that are like, they're shapes within multiple themes, and they're sort of hard to describe over a film, but there are connective bits of tissue in here as well.
Little snippet of Thorin's material there as well.
Yeah, the first bit of Thorin. And I think we're going to come up next to one of the themes associated with the Arkenstone. So we're seeing all their jewels here. So this is the theme, like I say, coming up for the Arkenstone. There's kind of two, and they're kind of related but slightly different. So we gave this one the title of Darklands. It sort of relates to the more mysterious sides of it. And I think we have our first choral text coming up as well, don't we? Here we go. So here are our voices. And I believe the female chorus is moving from Khuzdul, the language of the dwarves, to Quenya. You'll hear a bit of the choral text entitled "A Gem Like No Other."
And we also get a little snippet of the Woodland Realm material, which
this is unique to Extended. Yeah,
we won't hear too much of that in this picture, but it's all over the second one.
And this theme was written for this film because originally the film one ended after the barrel sequence, I believe. So you had all that Woodland Realm stuff was in there.
It did. Maybe when we get a bit closer to the end of the picture, we can talk about a few of those changes.
Yeah. Going from female voices to male voices to show where the power in this conversation lies. Back to some depressed elves. And the male voices for the dwarvish choir. It's almost always male voices when it has to do with dwarvish things other than the Arkenstone. And now we're going to get into our first bits of Smaug material here pretty soon.
Very recognizable.
Mm-hmm. Some of my favorite writing in the Hobbit scores, actually.
That whole theme of sickness becomes very important when we get to film 3.
Right. In this case, we kind of named the melody line associated with Smaug, and he has a few, but this was the one that we called Smaug the Magnificent. And then these heaving chords beneath it that we called the furnace chords, which is really just back and forth between major and minor chords on the same tonality.
It's all very malleable material. All the different component parts are often used completely independently and combined in very different ways.
Yeah, and as we get more into this, we should probably talk about the fact that that malleability is important in these scores because the themes in the Hobbit films are much more related to characters rather than sort of locations and items as they are in Lord of the Rings. So here we go into the Smaug material. And you'll notice that the intervals in this have that same sort of, a lot of augmented intervals, which is what Shore associated with the more ancient times of Middle Earth. And you get this sort of things with the Sauron's material and the elves' material and things like that. So it kind of shows you in a temporal sense where some of these things land.
Does it surprise you
Which of all 6 movies?
At this point in time, it's Desolation of Smaug.
Okay.
Which is the only one of the Hobbit films to have dedicated extended edition material as well. So it's probably a little over 3 hours of music in total, I think.
Well, a little bit, but I think that was something as he looked at it in terms of Middle Earth history. It's not that ancient. You know what I mean? Like these are the thematic changes tend to happen in concepts of thousands of years. This is what 60 years earlier. So musically, things very similar. I think he did play with some ideas of reorchestrating the Shire theme to give it a little bit of a more an earlier feel. I think there was some discussion looking into recorders and things like that, small orchestra type of thing. But I think those were all just very, very early concepts. I see we have a question about the late recording. That's actually how all of these were done. And that's in film kind of typical these days.
I know it did have a reasonably luxurious schedule. Recording started in August 2012 and ran through until mid-November.
I'm going to point out one theme here, and then I'll come back to the issue of the recording. You're going to hear a theme here, this kind of arcing arpeggiated thing as you see the dwarves leaving, that we call the Dwarvish Wanderers theme, and that does come back a few times in the score. I think there's a lovely use of it near the end of this score as well.
Only the best.
Yeah. So yeah, the recordings, they did happen late. Anything that has a ton of effects, the post-production is going very, very late, and that means the edit can be constantly changing. So people often have questions of like, well, this is a little bit different on the album. It doesn't sound like the version I hear in the film. Sometimes we had to send things into the album before they were locked into the film. So the album was locked in October. The film score was locked in early mid-November, I think. So here's our Dwarvish Wanderers theme. And I think there was a bit of the text for Erebor in there as well, another wonderful Philippa Loyens text.
Does it surprise you at all that Mr. Shore would have developed some woodland themes or something for Thranduil so early in an unexpected journey, even though he was in another film away from doing it?
Not necessarily, because Thranduil was originally in film 1, because
that's right.
When Howard Shore originally started writing for this film,
it was 2 parts.
The whole first hour of Smaug, Desolation of Smaug, was essentially part of Unexpected Journey.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, he has a wonderful sense of when these scenes are going to be important down the line too. You all remember that Gondor shows up a couple of key moments in Fellowship of the Ring, where it's not you don't really see much of Gondor or anything like that. But we're talking over this. This is mostly tracked music in here, meaning this is music that was written somewhere else and they put it in here. So that was what's that called? Flaming Red Hair, the Plan 9 piece from the Hobbit party.
It is.
Yeah, we'll hear a bit of the original Concerning Hobbits in here as well.
Did we hear something about Gandalf's fireworks? Is in that scene just now?
I think that's coming up. There is a quote for that. There's a little bit of the fireworks music. So he does. This is a great example of something that was used once in The Lord of the Rings. And it was a nice moment, but it didn't really have a thematic significance. And as it comes back here, well, now you've heard it twice, so it gains a sort of thematic connection. There's a reason for hearing it. So it'll be coming up in the Old Friends composition coming up shortly.
Just going back to the issue of terminology, I mean, there's a few terms we might use which may catch people out. So if we say a piece of material is tracked, as Doug says, that's generally moved from somewhere else in the film. If we talk about something being dialed out, that means it's been removed from the final mix. We probably won't. Typically, a piece of music in a film is referred to as a cue, but Howard Shore tends not to use that word, so we'll probably refer to them as compositions.
Let me ask an editing question, a technical question up front.
Sure.
If you're talking about how music has to fit the cut of the film at the final moment when they finish all the edits and all the post-production and special effects, and I would ask, whose job is it to keep up? Is it the orchestrator who suddenly gets another cut of the film on Friday and realizes, oh, we have to hold those clarinets for another 3 seconds or another 1 second?
Depends on the production. That did happen a little bit on the second and third films in this series. Most of the time that comes down to, the composer, if they're going to adapt the piece, sometimes they adapt the recording. Most of these, certainly the 3 Lord of the Rings films and the first Hobbit film, more often than not, the composition was tweaked and re-recorded, conformed, they would call it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you will take the finished recording and sort of conform that, and that would be more of a music editor type of job. It's different in every production, and it largely has to do with when that final edit comes in. Some directors like to cut things early and they're done with it. Some of them like to tinker into the last second. Digital editing has made film composition very difficult over the years. This is a great bit coming up here, I should mention. We've got a theme here that was played under the map, the dwarves map, as you see it in Fellowship of the Ring. And it was kind of the #1 fan favorite of, oh, that's got to be one of the themes in The Hobbit. And I think Howard was either aware of the fans' desire or agreed with them and made sure that he brought that back. So that was a theme that we've given the title Bilbo's Odd Behavior. It doesn't quite go right to the map. Sorry.
Am I correct in thinking that's just a little variation of the Hobbit outline?
It's very, very similar. There's a lot of this Hobbit material. There's another one of those themes where there's a shape that connects that with some of the Thorin material too. The dwarves are interesting characters. They're very different in this series, where they have, more of a sense of a love of home and a desire to return to home. So there's a little bit more connective material with the way the hobbits are presented, because they have their home and are currently enjoying it. And that comes up in the dialogue a few times too. So Howard kind of tied into that. All right, this is a beautiful moment here. Listen to that line with the whistle. Those 2 notes resolving there was something that was used under the party tree in Fellowship of the Ring. Here they use it and reharmonize it. If I remember correctly, in Fellowship of the Ring, that moves from the 7th degree of a scale to the root of the scale, moving up a half step. Here it moves from the sharp 4 to the 5. And of course, you're seeing a ring on the screen, and that's the hint of the History of the Ring theme. Oh. So it's another beautiful way that Howard is reminding you what the big picture is, but still being very sensitive to individual moments. And I apologize if I'm being overly familiar with people and calling him Howard. To me, he's a friend that I've worked with for quite some time, and I know other people.
No, of course, you're allowed.
A Mount Rushmore type of character. But
no. Is this where we should be listening for the arrival of Gandalf's theme?
It's coming up shortly, yes, which I absolutely love.
You know what? I'm going to go turn off the fan in the background so I can hear it better. 1 second.
So we're kind of doing weird chromatic variations on Hobbit material right here. And I'm still trying to watch my Twitter questions here. These are going to be, oh, yes, we will be doing Desolation of Smaug as well. Anybody sell buttons at the door? Is that a thing?
In England in the 1910s.
Was it?
Yeah, I'm sure there's some oblique.
All right, here we go with Gandalf's theme. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we are getting Gandalf's theme here.
There we go.
I'm not going to try to sing it. I'll just sort of speak it.
And fireworks as well.
Fireworks as well, yeah. So we're getting our quote from that. There it is. I think, I wouldn't say struggle, but I think it was a chief concern of his, but that's always the job of a film composer, I think one of the trickiest things with anything like this, where people are familiar with the story, is you sort of have this mental image of what it is going to be or should be or what have you. There's some wonderful mandolin playing in here, I believe. And so there's always that moment where you need to rectify something, especially like The Hobbit. Like a lot of us have been imagining what this would look like since we were little kids, and then you see a particular interpretation of it, and that's what we're working with. And you have to sort of balance those in your mind of going, what did I imagine, and what am I actually working with, and all that sort of thing. Thus far, mostly. Jim, correct me if I'm wrong. I think some of the extended stuff that was in the Erebor sequence is not released. Is that correct?
So generally speaking, most of the music is on the album. Everything is edited in some way or another. There's only 2 entire compositions that aren't on the Unexpected Journey album.
The Woodland Elves portion, was that on the album?
It is, I believe.
Is it really? We haven't had that theme. Oh, cool. Sorry, I should remember that. I was analyzing these scores and working on the albums at the same time, so it all got kind of mushed together in my brain. It's funny, I'll go back and watch these now, and I have to admit, the same with Lord of the Rings, because I worked on these so intensely for a very concentrated period of time. I don't go back and watch them for relaxation very often, mostly because I'm terrified I'll find something I missed or should have mentioned or whatever. But as I went back and watched these in the last week to sort of get ready to do all this, my brain still has some confusion with older edits of the film and incomplete effects and things like that I could swear they're in there someplace, and of course they're not. I'll try to point some of those out as we get to them, because it's kind of funny to know what almost happened. So this is a bit of Concerning Hobbits again, yeah? Track music. Someone's going to have questions about Bree for us tomorrow, or next time, I mean.
Almost certainly.
Well, he's already warning us on Twitter, so.
Yes.
Yep, you did.
If you watch there's a little documentary, I think, I'm not sure it's on the DVD, I think it's available on YouTube, that came out around the time of the album, and you can see he has the big hardback annotated Hobbit in front of him while composing.
And now the shadow of Dwalin on the door.
Indeed.
I think this was the first composition written for the film, if I remember correctly.
Of course, the themes are all written first, but in terms of writing the themes are all written first.
Yeah, I think this may have been in late 2011 even.
We have a question: will we someday get more unreleased cues from the soundtracks, just shared anywhere, or why not in a new album? Can we get more lyrics from the already released tracks? Well, we'd like to do the lyrics in the book. We've got them all here. As for more music, it'd be nice, we hope. There's
Definitely.
Gandalf's theme with the Who Said.
In my opinion, there's more than enough music to justify some complete recordings, and more than enough rarities to justify a disc or 2 of those.
Yeah. Sounds promising.
It always comes down to the logistics of these things. You know, it's not as if people are trying to stand in the way of anything, but sometimes things are difficult to do. We always had a joke with any of these Tolkien things that anytime we would try to do something, it would take about 5 times as long as we thought, because there's just so many entanglements with them. It's difficult.
That's often the way.
I don't know that was even up for discussion. That would be a fairly patchy way to score things, only because, you know, using leitmotifs, it's interesting because you do want to reference them at the appropriate times, but you can't just make a crazy quilt out of them. You don't have to have a sort of an overhead view of the composition that makes some musical sense. It can't just be a bit of this, a bit of that. I mean, it becomes, you know, it's almost an editorial thing rather than a musical thing at that point. So I don't think that was ever something that was really on the table at any point.
Yeah, and there are 13 of these guys.
Right, yeah. I mean, you'll notice that some of them, they don't even get much to say, so they certainly didn't have time to also develop a theme.
Well, Peter decided to let the haircuts do the talking.
Right, exactly. Yeah, Tolkien had the hoods, and yeah. Oh, okay. So right now I'm talking to nobody on their end.
We're listening from mission control in Houston,
Okay.
getting instructions. Ladies and gentlemen, Feely and Keely have just arrived at the doorstep of Bag End. If you're following along with us on our journey, our unexpected journey, we are now at 22 minutes, 17 seconds, pretty much. Doug, Jim, please. I was going to ask you about this note that you have in your liner notes for the special edition of The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. You observed that Mr. Howard Shore was following an operatic model by establishing an encyclopedic network of leitmotifs, dozens of themes that represented cultures, characters, objects, and dramatic concepts in Middle-earth. And is it unusual for someone to go into a film scoring profession and say, I'm going to apply the model of opera from an entirely different staged medium and make it apply to film music? Is that not fascinating?
It's fascinating, but it goes to the history of what this is as well. I mean, film music, the sound of orchestral film music. Now, films are scored hundreds of ways, but if we're talking about that orchestral tradition, there's some more material related to Bilbo in here, a couple of new themes. We'll talk about his fussy theme later down the line. But I mean, the earliest film composers when sound film came around, so we're thinking like the late 1920s, many of them were musicians trying to get out of Europe as the political climate changed and became quite horrifying. So they brought with them the traditions of European classical music, which contained connections to opera and ballet and symphonies and all these sort of things. And that sort of found a footing in, at that time, American filmmaking. This is a US produced film, it's certainly not a US made film. But that's where the sound of the ideas from opera started to get more ingrained into film. And they did exist during the silent period as well, which was very interesting. It happened kind of independently in Germany and France and the US and Italy and places like that. But they really, scores like King Kong had the idea of, the original King Kong, of course, 33, had the idea of applying specific themes to characters and events and ideas and things like that. So Howard was really walking in that established tradition, yeah.
And as an aside, if anyone is specifically interested in that period of film history, they should keep an eye out for Impossible Silence by Doug, which will hopefully be hitting some sort of bookshelves at some point in the not too distant future.
Yeah, digital or otherwise, we'll see what we can manage. But yeah, that's sort of our history of the silent period of film music. Did Shore ever express a desire to delve into motifs for each of the dwarves? No, I don't think so. When we worked on these films, in other words, when he would invite me to do the liner notes, the first thing he would always send me would be his handwritten sketches, scans of them, not the originals, but his handwritten sketches for all the new themes that would be appearing in each score, to sort of give me a little primer for the the principal themes, the main themes. And I saw the early versions of things and the kind of incomplete sketches and things like that. And I think most of the themes pretty much stuck to the way that he envisioned them. There's some material in this score in particular as they're trying to find the voice of the Hobbit, musically speaking. There were some themes that didn't show up quite as often as I think they were originally intended to. But that's really the only kind of change as far as that goes. There wasn't like a Bomber theme or anything like that. We'll leave that one open to the fans.
Yeah. So I mean, as we were discussing earlier, there's 13 of these guys, and to give each of them their own little thematic moments is going to be quite tricky.
Leitmotifs can be overpowering at some point. I mean, at some point you have to write a coherent composition. It's like having the leitmotifs are like the vocabulary, but they aren't the statement by itself. You still have to write your 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 thesis paper or whatever you want to call it. This just gives you some words for it. Shore did not write this song. It's by a wonderful composer, Stephen Gallagher, a wonderful guy. Actually, a number of people from the music crew sent me some notes as they got started in this, saying that they were all reading the book to get geared up for it. And he was one of the composers that worked on some of these songs. A really lovely guy. Classical music nerds will be excited to know the son of Arvo Pärt, I believe his name is Michael Pärt, was also involved with these scores, sort of on the technical side of things, which was kind of cool because he's a very, very famous, much revered classical composer. So to have that family involved was cool. But yeah, these songs, Howard didn't do any of the songs for this score. The only bit of source music he did shows up in Rivendell. We can talk about that when we get there. Oh, Jim, can you give us a definition of source music, Jim?
Yeah, so source music is also referred to as diegetic music, which is music that is typically played by an on-screen source. So a
always
record
refer to
player
it,
or instruments.
I give up on trying to type diegetic music because my computer continually changes to diabetic music. It doesn't make anything clearer for anyone. So
Tag.
all of the dwarven songs in the front end of this are the saving grace that many fans refer to as why this is their favorite of the trilogy. Because of that. From what I hear. And now suddenly Thorin has arrived.
And the tone has changed considerably. It's much less playful now.
Yes.
And I think we're getting to one of the fan favorite compositions here, the axe or sword. Oh, there he goes. There's the line. And there's a lot of material in here. You're going to get Thorin's theme, a theme for dwarvish suffering, which is another one of those sort of shapes that connects a lot of things. Hobbit material, Erebor material,
Smaug material.
Smaug's going to show up.
It's so when Howard Shore writes a composition, although if you listen to the film, it might sound like there's lots of little pieces of music and lots of stops and starts. It's often written end to end as a massive 8, 9, or 10-minute composition with long rests in the middle. So they're almost treated as movements rather than cues.
He liked to do that because he felt it was closer to writing to the book in a way. Yeah. He liked that sort of idea of doing long stretches of music, even if there was silence involved in the music between moments.
Aren't we using a hashtag, Doug, for questions to be submitted on Twitter?
Yeah, I had Hobbit score questions.
Excellent. Hobbit score questions.
There's Gimli's daddy. So like Jim says, you can see that the tone has changed quite a bit here. It's a real juggling act for the tone. You're going from humorous songs to this stuff within a matter of 2 or 3 minutes.
This is Smaug's other theme.
Yeah. This one we titled Smaug the Terrible. Smaug has a lot of material. You're going to get the chords here too.
I think we get a little bit of the instrumentation as well. I think there's some hanging gongs in there.
Yeah, I don't think he got quite into the gamelan stuff, which we can talk about with the next score, but he did sort of get into the metal percussion thing, which is something Shore's used in a lot of scores. He likes that sound.
The Eastern flavor was always there.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Thorin's theme and the weight of history. What was the inspiration is the question. Well, I think in one sense he had to relate it to established dwarf sounds. So there's a certain weightiness to it, a certain heaviness that you heard in the Moria music in Fellowship. You don't get a lot of dwarvish music in Lord of the Rings, so he kind of had a slightly open playing field, but he set up a few things. But I think he wanted to have a nobility to it, a strength to it, and maybe a little touch of tragedy to it. It's a grim theme in some ways, and not just in that sort of steely, tough leader way. It has a bit of tragedy coming, I think. And we're getting to a beautiful statement of that material right here. Gorgeous moment here. Kind of our first big orchestral swell since the Erebor prologue, I think.
The demands of exposition at this point are allowing the musicians to rest for a moment.
Somewhat. They're still back there all the times, yeah.
Yes.
Actually, ironically, I think the toughest part of this composition is the end of it. I think more beautiful dwarvish music. This is really, really, really beautiful.
With the key, that's lovely. Yes.
But I'm talking about the end of this, where you go back to the comedy bit and Bilbo faints. They had a very hard time figuring out. Jim's remembering all the.
Oh god, yeah.
all the versions.
There's like 20 different versions of that.
Right, and they did everything from Warner Brothers cartoons to something more dramatic to just sort of cutting it out altogether. But again, it's the whole issue of tone in this. You've gone from a funny song to dramatic, inspirational music about these characters' histories to a kind of a gag where somebody faints. So it's hard to balance all this out.
Philippa Boyens, Oscar-winning screenwriter Philippa Boyens, who worked so diligently with Fran and Peter on this film. She was quoted in the press before the release of this film saying that Tolkien's original story was a golden-hued fairy tale, a golden-hued story, and she had remarked on the quality of the film that kept some of that going.
Speaking poetically or visually?
I think visually.
Okay.
But I'm also curious if she was maybe speaking to the press after she had heard some of the recordings.
Possibly, yeah.
I wonder if that influenced, it would me, I can imagine.
Well, I always think these bag end scenes in a lot of ways are the scenes closest to Howard's heart. It always reminds me, and he says the same thing, so I'm not giving away any personal information, but it's very similar to the kind of area he lives in. He lives out in a forest and sort of a cozy house. Doesn't have a circular door or anything, but I think he sees a lot of his love of, as he always says, all things green and good. He sees his own love for that in the Shire scene. So I think they do have a sort of warmth to them, or a golden quality, if you will, to them, that it's very genuine. I think this is reflecting a lot of his own feelings in these scenes. I mean, you have to follow the drama and all that sort of thing, but I think there's something that's very natural to him about these. Sure, we don't want to get sued. There's no music coming from us because you're supposed to be watching along at home. We can't broadcast an entire film's audio, of course. So if you're just joining us, I guess we're coming up to Bilbo's about to faint. I don't know. Is there a better landmark? I'm not sure.
We're getting close to the point where Gandalf is, actually bargaining for handling Bilbo's life. And at the same time, he's trying to make his best impression that this is the right guy, the right burglar, and he's about to faint. It's quite comedic.
It is. Let's try to fight it off. So we're going to come up to another song here, and this is the song that everyone fell in love with from the original teaser trailer, the Misty Mountains song. This was also not a composition by Howard Shore. This was a composition by Plan 9 and David Long. And they did work on the Lord of the Rings films as well. They wrote the Hobbit party music. In the extended edition, they wrote the music for the elves moving through the old forest and all that. So they did some of these, as we described earlier, the diegetic or source music. So they did the Misty Mountains song. The Misty Mountains song then did an unusual thing and got incorporated into the score a little bit. And you'll hear that I guess in the scene after all of this, or a scene and a half after all of this. But it became a sort of theme for the company of dwarves that takes them up to the Misty Mountains. There's been some fan back and forth about whether they should have kept that theme through all 3 films, and it was always the company of the dwarves theme. So you can either agree with the filmmakers or not. That's totally fine. But their concept was, when you get to the Misty Mountains, you're no longer pining for the Misty Mountains, so you switch to other thematic things. And from that point on, it's like the first half of the journey is to the Misty Mountains. The second half of the journey is more about Erebor, and you hear more thematic material that deals with the dwarves' history and the heirs of Durin and all that sort of thing. And that's the theme that's sort of hinted at the main titles in this film, with this score. So you'll hear a lot of Misty Mountains music in this one, and then it sort of disappears after the score. We'll move on to the next leg of their journey.
There is a very brief shot in this firelit scene that's about to come up with the previous actor, who was replaced by Dino Gorman.
Oh, and I just got a question about the Misty Mountains theme. Sorry, yes, that's right. They had a change of actor, just like Aragorn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a fleeting snippet of Bilbo's theme in there as well, which
right
doesn't appear very much.
Bilbo has a couple of other bits of material that they do show up in this score here and there, and not very much. For the most part, Bilbo is scored like the hobbits from Lord of the Rings, where he's an element of his home. He's part of the Shire.
Yeah, I think ultimately that was a filmmaker decision. I think it was to make this feel as close to Lord of the Rings as possible musically.
There's a lot of questions about, like, how hard was it for Shore to find the tone on these, and I think maybe that was the thing that took the most examination, is how much do you make this feel like a brand new separate thing, and how much do you make it feel like it's a part of the story that we saw or chronologically will see in Lord of the Rings. And that came up in a few spots where you have returning elements. Is Bilbo his own hobbit, or is he a part of the Shire? Did Rivendell have the same theme in this era or this timeline as it does 60 years later? And those type of things came up a few times. How do we predate things, or does it really not make a difference in terms of Middle Earth history? Or
as you said earlier, in terms of Middle Earth history, 60 years is not a long time.
Right.
Not at all. In the Fellowship of the Ring, you are completely tricked out of 17 years between the time of Gandalf leaving after the birthday party and then coming back suddenly desperate and craggy in the middle of the night.
Yeah, he claims Bilbo hasn't aged at all, but Frodo looks exactly the same. So, bit of funny business there. All right, so we're coming up to the song by Plan 9 and David Long. This is a text almost directly out of Tolkien. It was adapted a bit. A lot of people, when this song was used in the teaser trailer, assumed it was composed by Howard Shore, and I could see why. It does follow some of his compositional fingerprints. That sort of folk-like quality to the melody.
He did write a completely different dwarf theme.
He did,
which is hinted at in a couple of spots on the original album. And there were a few compositions recorded for the film that used that. But again, I think the filmmakers were leaning towards using this Misty Mountains theme more than any other, just to represent the company of the dwarves.
Right. What reverb was used for these vocals? I don't think I would know the exact name of the plugin, but it was something done in a studio down there. They recorded this in New Zealand with the cast, with the actors. Although I think they may have had a little help. I don't think this was all the actors singing. You can hear some of their original singing on the DVD, so I think they fixed it.
I'm sure there is something about the recording of that on the DVD.
There is, yeah.
That's my favorite shot in the film. the fireplace.
The
and then
fire, yeah.
the cut straight up to the chimney and seeing all the embers going up into the night of the Shire, the Shire sky. It's my favorite moment in the film. I love it so much. I have to admit it out loud. The concept of how fans wanted Tolkien's poetry and songs represented is tied to the success of how it was represented in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You had Aragorn singing in Quenya at the coronation, very briefly, but so perfectly. You had Merry and Pippin having extended song and dance numbers added back to the Two Towers. And then the anticipation for An Unexpected Journey was that there's going to be more singing. There's so much front end narrative that is in the singing itself. Don't you think that affected Howard's approach to the project in a way? And telling, and I'm sure that in Fran and Peter's mind and in Philippa's mind also.
Yeah, well, I mean, the song decisions, those generally come more from the filmmaker thing, because a lot of those are, they're part of the script. It'll say in the script, Merry and Pippin are doing they're dancing on the tables and singing a Hobbit song or something. And then it comes down to, do we include that? Do we have a new composition? Who's going to do that? So Howard wasn't involved with a lot of the songwriting in these. He did a bunch of the songs, the end credit songs for Lord of the Rings, certainly. But yeah, it just comes down to filmmaking decisions. Howard largely, by the way, this is a big, lovely statement of the Shire theme here. Is
really is
his mind? Yeah,
this is the big moment that wakes everyone up.
Yeah,
from
right. Yeah,
the end of the party in the theater.
Kind of takes us out of Act 1 here. But Howard got these projects, I think, in the first place, largely because he had a lot of very, very successful literary adaptations in his career. Work with Al Pacino and, of course, all of his Cronenberg films and that sort of thing. So he had a great deal of comfort working with, musical versions of the written word and how do we make a coherent musical concept or score or whatever that sort of honors the author's intents. So I think that was a good call on the filmmaker's part. Fran talks about that a little bit in the foreword to the music of the Lord of the Rings films, about why they chose Howard and how he had such a wonderful sense of how to turn the written word into musical compositions.
But with any literary adaptation, he's always stated that he has the book to hand at all times.
Now we have a little bit of some of the dwarf theme in here, I think, don't we? And some dwarvish material, dwarvish wanderers, we titled it for the purposes of the book.
Have a little fussy Bilbo as well.
Yeah, this is Bilbo's fussy theme, we titled it. If you're a fan of our other Howard Shore scores, you might hear a little bit of the fingerprints of Hugo in that one, I think. Howard's French sound. Not to say that the French are fussy.
And ladies and gentlemen,
Gandalf's theme again, yeah.
There's Gandalf's theme appearing right at the 45-minute mark. For anybody who is now just coming to join us, we are now leaving the Shire. Perhaps we have already left the Shire. And we are in new musical territory here as we watch An Unexpected Journey with the musical scholarship of Doug Adams and Jim Wirt joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, we are just past 45 minutes. Welcome aboard.
Appropriately, this composition we've titled The World is Ahead.
Is that on my special edition of An Unexpected Journey?
I think so.
It's The Adventure Begins, and yeah, it's track number 8, The World is Ahead.
Very good.
Yeah, it's right before An Ancient Enemy.
That's right.
The question is, was there any intent on replicating the epic theme, that hero moment of the Fellowship theme, as they get out on their journey from Rivendell? Was there any attempt at replicating that?
There is, but I think they saved it for the dwarves leaving Rivendell. They have another moment similar to that. So they get the group together a little bit earlier in this story, but they still, in terms of the story beats, they still have that big statement of the theme later. So there's a bit of the Misty Mountains theme. There's a scientifically improbable use of moths. Although I guess the story is full of scientifically improbable use of moths.
Yeah, I think we'll let them get away with that.
It's okay.
This somehow reminded me of the scene of the spider in his mouth in The Revenant, but let's not even talk about that. Sorry. This is much more playful than...
Yeah, I should hope so. So we're going to get, here's a bit of light Bilbo music here, but we've got a flashback scene coming up, and you're going to hear some music that's more closely related to the way that Howard Shore scored the dwarves in Fellowship of the Ring. These are a little bit, the heavy male voices and open fifths and things like that as we see this battle outside the gates of Moria.
As an all bizarre.
Thank you, because I was just going to call it Moria if no one else could say that. And
those
we have
open
a couple
fifths, those chords. That's a hallmark of Khazad-dûm to have that type
a hallmark of the dwarvish sound in a lot of ways. I mean, he does use this a lot in his Middle Earth sound in general, but the dwarves especially, when you have male voices in open fifths, meaning it would be like a chord without the third of the chord. For example, the voice would be singing just a C and just a G, or just an E flat, just a B flat. And it creates a very, for lack of a less on the nose term, it's a very stony, sturdy type of tone. So you can hear why he might want to use that for the dwarves. We have two other wonderful texts by Philippa coming up in here. You'll have, these are both in Khuzdul, the language of the dwarves. You'll have Hold Fast and Son of Durin. I wasn't involved before Howard's involvement, but I can tell you that Fran said in the foreword to the book that Howard was the only composer that they offered it to. I am told through my own inside information that Horner was quite interested in it. If an offer was ever made, I couldn't tell you. I don't know how far or how limited those conversations were.
There are some interviews from a few years after Rings where I think Horner states that he was interested but was not willing to commit to something for 3 years.
Yeah, there were a lot of composers that were interested at the time. I believe Polydorus was interested, Kilar was interested. You never know how far, I could say I was interested, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure everyone was interested. It was an enormous project. I don't know if other people had discussions or agents reached out or how those things really went. So there's our bits of the classic sound of dwarvish music. And I think we're coming up to the Son of Durin text here, choral text. Son of Durin, grief sits cold upon your face. Years of hardship have left their trace. So on and so forth. Yeah, it's a men's chorus in the back. That's generally the vocal approach to the dwarves. Think back to the Moria stuff. No, this is all recorded in London. This is the chorus is the London voices.
And even on films 2 and 3 that were recorded in New Zealand, the choir was still recorded in London.
Yeah, it's the only New Zealand chorus you hear is for the Moria sequence that was prepared for the Cannes Film Festival in 2001.
We will hear some of that material return in film 3.
You will. The Battle of the Place I Can't Say. And you're going to get a little bit, again, I can't get too far into it because it's very difficult to explain in this sort of format, but the shape that we associate with the dwarves suffering, which of course, they have a victory here, but it's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory, very heavy losses on their end. No, these are both texts by Philippa Boyens. The question was, do these texts come from the book or are they original texts? And these are texts by Philippa, translated by David Sallow. David Sallow, at least at one point. I don't know if he still does, but he's a Midwestern guy, lives in Wisconsin, not too far from me. Although I think I've only ever met him in New York. But he did all the translations for both the score for the choruses and anything that was dialogue in the films. He did all the translations. I think he even came up with the name Tauriel, I think. He's a Tolkien scholar, a linguist. It's very literal in terms of rising and descending lines. If the notes go up, if the notes come down. I referred to the shape of the Erebor theme having a sort of mountain peak shape to it, because you have one note. If I'm not actually looking at my camera, you have one note starts here, then it goes up, comes back down, goes up a little bit higher, comes back down, goes up a little bit higher. So we do think
three horn calls of Erebor.
Yes. That's right. That's right. And we think of those as musicians as the contour or the shape, and it is sort of a visual thing, but we still think of that as part of the the profile of melodic writing. So if I'm referring to the shape, it is literally the shape, rising, falling. I guess you could have shape where you talk about dynamic things too, a loud note here, a soft note there. It's a sort of a conceptual thing. But these themes exist in sort of horizontal space, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
So we are thinking,
you go back to the Fantasia sequence where they open up with a toccata and fugue.
Yeah, sure, right.
It was the job of the Disney animators in the 30s to visualize the shape of melody with abstract art. And that's exactly where it comes from, I think.
I think the original Bolg was in there for a second. I just caught him, When I saw Desolation of Smaug, he was Bolg the whole time, but Bolg was also in the movie a lot less when I saw the early cut of it.
I believe there was a couple of action figures released as Bolg that featured that guy. Early release figures before it changed.
Speaking of changes, we're coming to one of the big musical changes here, which is as we get into Radagast. So Radagast's theme on the album is a different theme. And it's a really very wonderful theme. That's Howard Shore's original take on Radagast, and they have made some changes as time went on. So the music is a good bit different in the film. There's a little bit of a secondary wizard theme, by the way. This is a theme that relates to all of the wizards. This little rising and falling figure. And there's Gandalf's theme. So we're going to get into an alternate Radagast, and people always ask, well, why didn't they use this one on the album?
Because it was recorded really, really late.
Yeah, it was recorded afterwards, and I think Howard was quite fond of the original composition, and I must admit I am too. I think it's a very unique flavor in Middle Earth that still fits in with everything.
I think it was one of the first pieces sort of previewed from the album way back in 2000.
Yeah, that's right. It totally confused people because then it didn't show up in the film anywhere.
Yeah, I noticed that earlier today when I was listening to that. That sounded quite different, I thought.
So just to explain alternate material, typically a composer will write a composition, it will be reviewed by the filmmakers, and then they may request changes. The composer may make changes on the fly during recording, or they may go away and rewrite a completely different piece. So if we refer to an alternate, it just means there are multiple versions of something.
In the film score community, the fans get very, or often get very up in arms when a composer, especially a favorite composer, is asked to rewrite something. It can get a little over the top. As I say, digital editing makes the editing of films go so quickly that you can wear a composer down by asking for new drafts of this and that and this and that, because music is not written at the same pace that you can digitally edit a film. That said, it is part of the process. These things do change, and there is often, some discussion of what tone needs to be. And like any other element of a film, there's a lot of voices involved. You have a composer involved, you have a director involved, you have a studio involved, you have producers involved. So it's deciding what the tone should be does take some work. So it's part of the process.
Yeah, and on this particular film, you had Howard Shore recording in London. You had Peter Jackson and team in New Zealand.
Right.
you obviously have the time zone difference there, and Howard Shore would typically record a number of different variations of things, a number of different options, just to give the filmmakers some ideas to choose from. So within one composition, you might have 5 or 6 different versions of small sequences of maybe only 4 or 5 bars.
And he did that on Lord of the Rings as well. Maybe not to the
Yeah,
extent that he
yeah.
did for this first Hobbit film, but he did give options, as Jim says. You know, when the directors put these things together, sometimes you notice that you need something a little bit louder here, a little softer here. These films are long by, you know, sort of commercial standards, I guess I would say. Most films that are big blockbuster films are about 2 hours long, give or take. I guess the stuff like Avengers are pushing that forward these days. But it's hard to balance those. Nothing too big with the ring wraiths yet. We're in the Radagast the Brown composition. There is another text in here I should mention that's just called Radagast by Philip O'Boyens, but I don't think we have any ring wraiths yet.
No, we are getting Necromancer material, which is
Yeah.
obviously very close to Sauron material.
We're getting into material that is, yes, exactly right, super close to what we hear for Sauron in Lord of the Rings, but some of the intervals are a bit different. So we call this the Necromancer instead, because it is unique enough to be its own theme.
Yeah, big statement here.
There is incidentally you hear these notes coming down here. There's these descending thirds, notes that are 3 notes apart that are often used associated with Dol Guldur and Azog and things like that.
And that's the first time we hear them right there.
Yeah, and there's a version that goes with Azog that is just by sheer coincidence quotes the opening pitches of Beethoven's Fifth. So I think I worked that's often referred to in musicological circles as very limited musicological circles as fate knocking on the door. That was the impression that Beethoven's Fifth gave. So I think I refer to that something along the lines of fate or fatalistic in the liner notes to entertain my music history side of my brain. There's a couple of very small nerdy quotes like that, a Beethoven quote that I worked in, something about forest murmurs, which of course refers to Wagner. It's a miracle I ever got married. So we're still getting some questions about why does Misty Mountains theme only appear in the first film? Again, that was something that they wanted to accompany the dwarves up until the Misty Mountains, more or less. So it was a sort of film 1 thing. Film 1 portrays them moving toward Erebor. Film 2 portrays them being drawn toward Erebor and its history. And film 3 more portrays them dealing with their heritage inside Erebor. So it was a structural idea.
And of course, the journey into Thorin's gold madness, the dragon sickness, musically portrayed. Yes.
Yeah. Thorin somewhat inherits Smaug's theme at that point.
Mm.
So this is the Trollshaws. You're going to hear a little bit of that, what I referred to as the secondary theme of the wizards, the Istari theme. And now we're going to get into the trolls.
If the question is, would there be any Istari music in Amazon Studios' prequel show? No, because there won't be any Istari. There will be no wizards in the Second Age. They don't exist back then. Funny you should ask. Now, the trolls.
The trolls have a little bit of a theme in here. It's sort of a comical theme that just sort of bends a triad around. Being a film music nerd that I am, it makes me laugh a little bit because it somewhat recreates. If anyone has ever seen the old Halloween film Abbott and Costello, meet Frankenstein, it's very similar to the Frankenstein theme from Frank Skinner's score to that. Yeah, there's a great animated Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. Yeah.
Because they
met this is total coincidence. Yeah, I think they met the Wolfman. And,
all the universal monsters they got to meet. Oh, this is so fun. Also, ladies and gentlemen should be reminded, all Dungeons and Dragons players everywhere should be reminded, that it was Professor Tolkien who single-handedly invented the defeat a troll, get to go and inspect the treasure hoard, and get the goodies that they left behind. That started in 1937 with The Hobbit.
The Trollshaw's composition is going to end here. Oh, sorry. Tolkien is credited with inventing the word orc. All right.
We're getting themselves.
Yeah, we're getting into the roast mutton composition here now. Soon. Sort of a combination of the Trolls theme, the bum 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 bum, and some Misty Mountains in there, Thorin's theme. This is another one that had several drafts to it. I think when the dwarves burst in to save the day here.
Yeah, this was one of those ones where if you have this standard album, you will hear a different piece of music to the deluxe album.
I'm trying to monitor our questions here.
Me too. Great question. The question
generally
is
yes.
if there is an alignment between the director and the composer on when silence should be used instead of music.
For the most part, that's all part of the discussion. When you first score a film, the very first step generally, or at least a very early step, would be a spotting session where you sit down and decide where all the music should go and where it shouldn't go. So that would include things like where should silence belong. As Jim was talking about earlier, sometimes Howard will provide options and say, well, if you want music here, here's a composition that would work. It would be timed out to fit. If you decide you don't want it, dial it out, don't use it.
Yeah, there's a few specific examples like that. I mean, in the opening scenes with Bilbo and Gandalf, there are versions where there are specific pauses in the music for lines of dialogue in some versions, but in other versions, the music just plays straight through. Yeah. And the scores themselves have little PJ notes on them where you might suggest that Howard tacits a few bars or doesn't play a few bars.
I think there's an instance in one of these, Jim, you might remember this better than I do, but one of these, there's music that's not used in the theatrical edit of the film that is put back in for the extended edition of the film.
Yeah, we will get to that when we get to Rivendell.
Okay, that's coming up. Okay.
I think one of the standout moments in my memory is in the fight scene in the Chamber of Mazarbul in Fellowship of the Ring, where the music, where the score vanishes for a moment or two.
Right. And that was decided upon. There was no music written there that was taken out, I believe. I think it was just as conceived.
Do you know how awkward it is feeling in these post-COVID days, watching someone sneeze snot all over or Bilbo?
Yeah, I think if Martin Freeman came out of my nose, I would go and see a doctor quite quickly.
True. Us right now. Poor Martin Freeman just got blasted by the mucus cannon, the famous troll snot cannon. That's right. And we're at the moment with Bilbo's first encounter with the trolls, and they still haven't figured out who he is yet.
So you're going to get to this moment here where there's a different version in the film than there is on the album, and I think there's maybe even another version someplace where there was a lot of discussion of how thematically to present this moment. Do you use the Misty Mountains theme? Do you use the other Dwarvish theme?
I think all the versions use Misty Mountains in some way.
True, some more than others, though.
This one's a little more on the nose than the album version, I think.
Yes, we just crossed the 1 hour and 5 minute mark, ladies and gentlemen, and here come the dwarves to the rescue.
Big orchestral statement of the song they were singing in Bag End.
We should probably talk about what's going on in the brass here.
Oh, aleatoric music, yeah. So Howard likes to use this type of writing which we call aleatoric music. And you will sometimes see that referred to as box notation and things like that. But it essentially will give, you can hear the brass players do it here, as Jim says, you'll give the players a collection of 2 notes or 5 notes or 8 notes or whatever it happens to be, and some instructions. Don't repeat the same note over and over. Don't play them backwards. Do play them in any order you want. Whatever the instructions happen to be. And it creates, each player gets to improvise on those instructions. It creates a wonderful sort of bubbling texture that doesn't have the typical like rhythmic push of something that would be more traditionally notated. It's very floaty but very disrupted at the same time.
Yeah, it's all over Goblin Town. Later on in the film, which has some of the craziest writing in it.
That's fantastic to learn. That's really cool. I've learned something new. I'm going to be listening for that.
It's a 20th century technique. Film composers do use it a lot, but I think Howard Shore really likes to use it. He's written some wonderful scores where it's like almost the principal voice of the score.
The Cell.
Cell, right.
Is a good one to check out.
God, I love that.
Gorgeous score. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all over the Two Towers as well.
Yeah, it's all over all of the Lord of the Rings films, but it does sort of pick up as it goes. So we're going to eventually get to the appearance of Gandalf here, along with a nice big statement of the beginning of his theme. And this is technically a choral text, but we didn't include it as a choral text in the book because it's not really a bit of prose or anything. But the chorus sings in Sindarin. They sing Menno, or away, to drive off the trolls.
Oh, wow.
Turn them to stone. So listen for Menno in the chorus coming up here in a little bit. So the first time I saw this film, let's see, this was released in, I forget this all the time, 13? 12.
December 2012.
Yeah, there you go. I saw it in October of 12. And so far, up to this point, most of this film was fairly locked in. Most of the edit was done. Most of the effects were pretty polished. I can actually show you here. I kept a little booklet as I was studying the scores of each of the individual themes and particular moments. You can't take these scores home with you. So you're sort of jotting things down as you go and trying to remember, oh yeah, I have to mention this in the notes, I have to mention this in the notes, and that sort of thing. But as we get later into these films, things were much less complete as I was watching them. So I'll tell you a little bit about some of the early drafts of things.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning just having the word dragon flying around on the screen.
That's true. They hadn't finished the look of Smaug at the time, so you just had the DRAGON flying across the screen at various points. Well, they largely took it out of here. This is mostly unscored. You can see it's starting to enter back in here, but I think generally, I'm trying to think. Oh, here's our one choral bit here. Let him. Menno, away.
Calcified troll.
I don't know that most of the comic stuff is largely left unscored or scored against type. I don't think there's a lot of comedic scoring per se, is there?
Yeah, I think the film strikes the right playful tone until we get to the Warg chase, and then it becomes much more serious.
Mm.
The infamous scene 88.
Right. Well, he did Mrs. Doubtfire. The question or the comment was Shore is Shore known for playfulness in his work, but he did Mrs. Doubtfire, and Hugo certainly has some moments of sophisticated levity. Yeah. So yeah, he's got a little bit. She Devil, the great Roseanne Barr film.
He has. Yeah, a man who's done a lot of horror scores and a lot of crazy stuff for Forgive me.
Cronenberg.
For Cronenberg.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden, he's the man who's writing the fun, playful, themes of Merry and Pippin, causing their mischief as they drink ent drafts and try to outgrow it. He's capable of all of the above.
Yeah, that's in a way that's the job of a film composer. You have to be a bit of a chameleon. So a troll horde is the composition that we're getting into now.
Ah, yes.
And a little bit again of the dwarvish wanderer music that kind of comes back in very subtle ways.
Oh, really? I hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
This is the satisfaction of every dungeon crawl D&D game ever. The concept was birthed from this moment, as I said before. Ladies and gentlemen, there it is. Nori, get me a shovel.
So there's our dwarvish wanderer figure in the strings and octaves behind all this.
Nobody heard that joke from Mission Control. But...
Oh, that's right. I keep forgetting. Yeah. He said it. He's hearing Legend of Zelda music in his head.
I had always found it lamentable that we have Glamdring and Orcrist made by elves so many thousands of years ago, the Noldorin elves, and yet neither of those blades glow. Like in any of the 6 films, neither of those blades glow the way that Sting does.
They changed the formula for those, I guess.
Mm.
So the next bit we're going to get into here will be the Hill of Sorcery, where we're back to some heavier material.
Yeah, we get a little bit of that original Radagast stuff as well.
Yes.
And this is that'll be one of those scenes where it's just an example of how things move around. The sequence where Radagast visits Dol Guldur was in several different places in this film. Ultimately ended up being in flashback later on here.
Mm-hmm.
No, I believe that in the book, I believe Bilbo finds Sting himself and finds it an appropriate sword for himself. In fact, I have my copy of the annotated Hobbit. We're going to look that up right now. I'm going to triple check that.
I have one of those here too.
Roast mutton.
It's a little bit of the original Radagast material here. Kind of 2 little figures laying on top of one another. And then we'll get into what we call the Dol Guldur descending thirds. They had other descending thirds in Lord of the Rings. Here the pitches are a little bit different. But we're still finishing up with Radagast.
Yeah, Radagast takes a while to get to the point.
Yeah, we've got a bug joke coming up.
Yeah. Bilbo in the book actually discovers the key to the troll's hoard. It's not an open cave, it's locked.
Mm-hmm.
And the dwarves exclaim, well, why didn't you bloody say so? And they take the key and unlock the troll's little treasure pile. And Bilbo takes his own knife on his own accord.
Oh, cool. a unique choice for a favorite moment. Somebody in the chat room was saying that the transition there from Bilbo getting the sword to the arrival of Radagast is their favorite moment in the score. It is certainly a good example of how nimbly Shore can change the tone without it really feeling like it. The end of this cue is a workout for the brass. Yeah,
it is.
Well, they had the great London brass players on this, so.
Now back to Dol Guldur, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just following along with us, welcome. We're at 1 hour and 17 minutes nearly in Dol Guldur. No, this is not a location that we will be visiting in the Second Age of Middle-earth. So everyone enjoy this extraordinary visualization of this creepy place.
You can hear some familiar tones from things that very closely represent or resemble, the Lord of the Rings music, the skip beat figure, in the elegant name that I gave it that kind of stuck with it, so my apologies. And here we're going to get the Necromancer's theme.
I love this, the excited bunny music.
There was a comment, I was watching some of the behind-the-scenes stuff the other night, that they don't think rabbits actually do thump their feet to warn anybody. That was just a reference to Bambi. For evidence of the comedy being unscored here.
Yes, we do not condone the use of any illicit substances.
No. Right here, the Witch King's theme has not showed up yet. It would be the Ring Wraith music. So we're getting more just some of the there was a bit of the Necromancer theme, but there's also some material that's sort of secondary material associated with Sauron and Guldur in this case.
The Witch King does get a little bit of material when we get into film 2, when we get to the High Fells.
Right, a new bit of material.
Indeed.
So I think we're getting into Warg Scouts.
We are.
Oh, there we go. So you just yelled it.
Warg Scouts. Oh, that's actually track 15. Warg Scouts.
Perfect. So there is some music associated with the wargs. Get some very forceful statements in this score. And we at the end of this sequence, we'll get into one of the more hotly debated moments in the score. We can take a look at it and see if we can come to a consensus.
Debated. A little debate.
You'll see.
Okay. And here we are in the scene 88, which was the scene that almost destroyed the constitution and health of the entire cast. Or it could be looked at as the best workout they ever got.
How many days did they spend filming this?
Running out there in the wilderness, I forget. It was endless days.
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah. And I think he, in some of the scenes I saw, was still in there as Azog. Which is a little confusing because I couldn't tell it was the same character or not. I don't know if anybody's just tuning in right now, but if you are, I'm still trying to answer questions on Twitter if you want. My DMs are open right now, or you can use the hashtag HobbitScoreQuestions. Or if you just want to listen to us and enjoy, feel free.
Doug Adams Music on Twitter.
Doug Adams Music, that's my Twitter name, yeah. Come at it with fresh eyes and fresh ears, I think. I mean, a lot of these things, when you're scoring a film, it's not just who's in it and all that sort of thing. There's a lot to do with the pacing and the editing and the stakes, what's at hand, and all that sort of thing. So,
and most of the Warg attack in Two Towers is unscored.
Quite right, yeah. And they don't have a unique theme. There's a theme sort of associated with that sequence, but there's not like a Warg leitmotif necessarily.
I think the music originally played through this. I think it's a little chopped up in the final mix.
I think the album version is different on this as well. Don't they use the original?
Yeah, with Radagast
theme on top of the chasey bits.
Yeah.
And when that theme was not part of the score, they redid the Radagast moments in this chase, trying to keep everything nice and coherent.
Is this not a slight variation of the Erebor theme? Dun, 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 dun,
yes, quite right. Yeah.
With an extra bit added on, a fourth statement of it. Right?
Yeah. He does a lot of variations on Erebor. It's, as I say, he does still like to go back to the idea of relating characters to their homelands or to their culture. The Hobbit scores certainly have more in terms of character themes. You have a Gandalf theme, a Gandalf the Grey theme. You have a Thorin theme, and those type of things rarely happened in Lord of the Rings. They're more cultural themes. But he does at times, to keep everything part of the same picture. He does like to use cultural themes during moments like this to remind you, what's happening. It gives you an emotional grounding for these things. They're not just running around a field with monsters chasing them. There's a reason. There's a larger quest at hand. All right, so we're coming up to a moment of controversy.
I remember this character's name. It's Yazneg, the name of this lead orc on the Warg.
Here's more Erebor music. My younger brother used to think his name was Killy because he was good at killing people. So we have a bit of Elvish music here as the riders arrive, but it is the Elvish theme associated with Lothlorien, not the Elvish theme associated with Rivendell.
It is the Elvish theme I hear when they arrive at the Battle of Helm's Deep.
Right, which is the archers from Lothlorien.
I can't believe it. I've never noticed it till just now. That is the music I hear when Haldir and his men arrive to battle at Helm's Deep on the ramp.
Right, and it's the music that's under Galadriel in most of her appearances as well.
It's the first theme you hear in Fellowship of the Ring.
Yes, that's quite right. That's the opening of Fellowship. But of course, the discussion here is, well, aren't those elves from Rivendell? They're outside Rivendell. So I don't know. You could always imagine, I suppose, that Galadriel is soon to be in Rivendell. Maybe her escort arrived ahead of her and lent a little aid. It's hard to say.
Let's assume that some of these riders are not normal cavalry from Rivendell, that they've arrived as part of, because she's already there at Rivendell.
We can justify that if we choose to.
Well, the other controversy probably comes later on when, later on.
I know.
Okay.
That's right. I might lose power at that point. We'll see what happens.
The fan audience would not forgive us for not.
All right.
Okay, but
that is the number one question that comes up. Yeah, people do seem like they get heated on that one.
We just went through one of my other favorite shots in the film, where the overhead camera is over them, over that deep crag, looking at them straight down before they arrive. And here, the most noticeable music. You hear the music before they visually see it.
We're getting into Rivendell, and this was this is where the discussions began, I suppose, where, okay, we're seeing a place that we're familiar with from Lord of the Rings. Is it thematically identical? Do we do a new variation of the theme? Do we recreate the moment of the I guess, the Hobbits and Aragorn and them arriving in Rivendell. And eventually they decided to hew a bit closer to what you hear in Lord of the Rings rather than doing a kind of new take on it. There is a very exciting new take on the Rivendell material in the third Hobbit film, so we'll talk about that another time. But here they kind of keep the sound of Rivendell very similar. There's an alternate going into this as well that did not get used. I think it was a different edit of the film. But the chimes, the big tubular bells that you hit with hammers, came in a little bit earlier, and they were sort of doing that improvised aleatoric sound as well. So there was a little bit of a kind of variation leading into the standard Rivendell music, but eventually that didn't fit this edit of the film. So that was the Hidden Valley. Actually, I should point out there is something that was different. The choral text in there was different. That was a text titled Rivendell Revealed, and that's not the same text that they used in Fellowship for that moment.
Yeah, I thought it sounded different. My Cindarin's a little rusty, but
That's okay.
thought I noticed the difference.
Yeah, here lies the refuge for the weary. Come, traveler, discard the dreary. The outside world, which has taken its tally, is soon forgotten in the Hidden Valley. And so on and so forth. It keeps going. That's the translation, of course. They're not singing that in English.
Honestly, the conversation about the high frame rate is something that is best left to the ancient past, and we'll call it, we'll call it an interesting attempt to visualize this world. But you get much more satisfaction, I think, among the audience when the original 24 frames per second gives it that filmic look that they're so fond of in the original Lord of the Rings trilogy.
How many of us here saw it in the high frame rate? Obviously, you saw it, Cliff.
I saw only the first two films. I did not see the third film released in HFR because they didn't. The studio pulled back, did not release the third film in HFR.
They did in the. I'm sure they did in the UK.
Oh, they did? Really?
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
I may be
wrong. Did you see it, Jim, in the high frame rate?
I saw all three in HFR.
Okay, I didn't. I've still never seen anything in high frame rate. I went out of my way to not see it because I didn't want to. I didn't want anything to change my experience, I guess.
People see it in different ways. A number of people felt that it was more lifelike. Other people seem to think it was very disorientating. I'm pretty leaning more towards the disorientated camp.
Okay.
But never really took off. I haven't seen anything else released in that format since.
No, I think they're doing some of the Avatar scenes with that frame rate, or even a higher frame rate, like 60 frames or something like that. But that's no go? Okay, it makes sense. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I wanted as little visual distraction as possible because I was trying to concentrate on these scores. My schedule is such that I was expected to have this book wrapped up, or at least my work on it, shortly after, like a few months after Battle of the Five Armies. So I knew I was going to be on a compressed timeline, and I really had to have Hobbit music in my head consistently for about 3 years, or maybe a little bit longer.
I remember the rush.
You were there for part of the rush. Yeah, we had a series, a long series of concerts in New York in April of that. What they've been 15. Right? Is that the year?
Yeah, it was
something
April
like that. 14,
15, I think.
15. Okay.
April 15.
Yeah, and we had concerts to do and some speaking events and things like that. And the rest of the time I was holed up in a hotel trying to write things. So this is the one bit of source music or diegetic music or on-screen music that Howard did actually compose. This is The Valley of Imladris, and it almost made the album. Ended up not making the album, but
for wooden alto, flute, Renaissance lute, theorbo, and harp.
That's right. As you do. but this is the only piece in all 3 films of diegetic music that he wrote specifically for that. There's a big blast of the Erebor theme that becomes diegetic music in the film, the 3rd film, but it was not written to be diegetic music. It does call into question, though, whether or not these characters know all of these themes. I'm getting some questions in my direct messages. Cool. Okay, well, I can talk over this one here. Hi from Japan. I'm going to ask you a question. Is the Wizards theme in the Hobbit films implied in the Lord of the Rings? I don't think it is. I think it's unique to these scores.
I don't think there's anything. There's nothing that immediately springs to mind that's directly connected to it.
No, I think he wrote that specifically for this.
Yeah, I mean, Gandalf does have a little. There's a little sort of running string line in the Rings films where he's facilitating stuff, but I wouldn't go so far as to call it a theme.
Right, and some of these things are just like Howard Shore's fingerprints or personal language too. So sometimes we can say, "Well, that reminds me of," blah, blah, blah. But sometimes it's just his voice. My second question is about the Rise of Skywalker, so I'll look at that another time. We can talk about that some other chat. Oh, here we go. This is we did talk about this, but I'm happy to go back to it. What does the theme that plays over the Warner Brothers logo at the start? What does that represent? So that is a combination of the shape or the number of beats per measure, in a sense, or notes per measure of the Heirs of Durin theme that you'll hear more in the Desolation of Smaug, combined with the sharp 4/5, the first 2 notes, the first 2 pitches of the History of the Ring theme. Mm-hmm. So it's a way to sort of introduce the Hobbit story and remind the audience or the people about to hear this tale that it's part of what we've heard before.
I think we hear another hint of that in a couple of minutes.
We do. It's very fascinating the way that Howard treats the Ring material in these scores. You could do a whole book just on that, I think, or at least a chapter of one. But he essentially he always wants to reference the Ring, but he finds like how little you can do to reference the Ring. So generally, when you have references to the Ring, you get a bit of the theme, and there's even a really fascinating major mode setting of the Ring theme at the Gollum scene. But from there on out, he kind of reduces it just to 2 notes. You just hear that sharp 4/5 thing, and that's all he needs to reference the Ring. And it's very clear what the references are. It's not like they're sort of, open to interpretation. Did he mean the Ring? Did he not mean the Ring? It's always right on the imagery. But it's like taken down to bare essentials, so that it doesn't overwhelm this story, but reminds you that it is something significant. So I think it's a really, really fine gesture. Mm-hmm. And as Jim says, we'll talk about that more as we go, of course.
I have a sneaking suspicion that major mode Ring theme that you mentioned isn't actually in the final mix.
Well, you made me look like a fool, Jim. There are a number of things in the book that reference the original intent of the score. So sometimes there are changes in the film. And I think it may be talked about the last time I was with all you guys. There's even some of the writing in the second score where I put things back into the order that the music was composed in. The cross-cutting between scenes eventually changed the structure of the music. And it made more sense to discuss the music as it was composed. So there are some changes like this. We are in the composition right now, Moon Runes, of course. And there is sort of some material here that you'll hear come back in the second score, this moment right here. You're going to hear for the reveal of the keyhole in the Desolation of Smaug also. So that becomes a Moon Letters theme.
Oh.
It's a very convenient coincidence.
I like that Elrond just has this massive location purely for doing this.
In case any dwarves ever need help. I have just the spot. If you listen to the low strings, you can hear some wonderful portentous takes on the Rivendell material. Basically just arpeggios, but giving that wonderful color low in the orchestra like that.
Not at all. The question is, how do fans envision this scene where the moon letters are revealed with the light of the moon always shining behind them, as it is in the text? And then suddenly we have this genius device, as Captain Hook would call it, an ingenious device that Elrond has, this crystal table which captures and reflects the moonlight. It's an interesting thing that is an echo, a unique visual echo of Galadriel scrying in her mirror, but it's not the way I ever visualized it in my mind reading the book.
So we're getting into the Defiler here, another composition. This is a lot of that material I said that's related to Dol Guldur, but bent in specific ways to represent Azog.
This is his first appearance.
Well, you see him in the battle outside Moria.
Oh,
but this
right.
is his first, I suppose, you see that he survived here. Yeah.
Ah, yes. It's his second appearance. It's the first orc I've ever seen have a beard, have facial hair.
There's no place to shave out in the wild.
Yeah, he's the first orc I've ever seen to actually have facial hair.
There is a lot of hair in this film.
Yeah, they already had a hair budget, so they figured they could go nuts. Well.
Is it a surprise that there's no return to the Weathertop theme, since we're here at the same location?
Weathertop didn't really have any theme of its own. Most of that was scored with the Ringwraith material.
Yeah, so you do get the descending thirds again.
Yes, yeah.
A little connection.
Yeah, true. Yeah, Weathertop, it seems like it's always musically associated with the villains.
So this piece was originally written and recorded during the original sessions, but the scene wasn't in the film. The theatrical release, that is.
Yeah, we should probably mention how some of these schedules work. On the Lord of the Rings, when they went back to do the extended editions, they always had more recording sessions in the spring. If I remember correctly, they always released the DVDs like the November before the next film would come out. They changed it for Return of the King. But, on these films, I don't think they had any special recording sessions for the extended editions. They mostly got what they needed at the initial recording sessions. And then, like we said, in those additional scenes in the Shire, they tracked in some music from Fellowship of the Ring. But most of these recorded all in that same initial batch of sessions. They didn't go back and do springtime sessions.
No, although when we get into film 2, we'll talk a bit more about these specific extended edition compositions, which were recorded at I think the same time as everything else.
I think
maybe
so.
Maybe slightly later.
Comment in my messages here. The Moon Rune theme reminds me of the map room from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Seems to have the same eerie quality to it. I think I'd agree with that. It's a nice connection. Yeah, both beautiful moments, musically speaking, and filmically speaking.
This is the additional scene of Elrond and Bilbo speaking to each other, and an extension of friendship and permanent hospitality for Bilbo, which is really quite nice. It's not every day a great elven lord offers you permanent hospitality.
And this all falls under the title of the White Council. So as we said, some of these are very long compositions. So even though the council itself hasn't begun, we're sort of within that composition already. So the question is, Elrond is supposed to be in the Amazon show. Will there be any musical themes carried over? Well, the question becomes, are they going to try to keep the musical themes consistent? But at least in these films, he's always associated with the Rivendell material. He's a good example of a character. Oh, there we go. He's an example of a character that does not have a personal theme, but is associated strongly with his homeland, with his culture. The elves of the woodland realm are not like that, though. They almost all have some sort of individual material, and we'll get into that on film too. Nope, Rivendell does, but Elrond does not. Even Elrond's heroic appearance at Battle of the Five Armies in the third film here, I mean, he's still accompanied by a sort of militaristic statement of Rivendell. I think more questions. Excellent.
I think we get that sort of heirs of Durin line in here somewhere. If I remember correctly.
Maybe. Trying to recall. We do have a question here, though. What was the most challenging theme for Shore to develop in The Hobbit? And what was the most challenging scene to score? That's a good question, actually. Challenging theme to develop? I don't know. Are there any themes that truly change personality between initial statements and where they go? I don't know. I mean, I would say that's part of what Shore does so well. So if any of them were a challenge for him, it was all behind the curtain because they all sound very elegant in the way he developed them. I think it's just a gift that he has. He understands how far you can bend a material into other moods without losing the idea of what that material is. You can still recognize it. You can still find its personality.
In terms of compositions being difficult to write,
yeah.
I would say it's not necessarily the long sort of notey action sequences. It's often the smaller moments that you have either the most changes or the most rewrites.
I think maybe you could say in the Hobbit trilogy, the scene that required the most reworking is probably the dwarves arriving to attack the trolls, right? It's quite possible. Oh, cool. Somebody says they're grateful for the answers, so you're very welcome. Anyone else has any? Drop me a line.
This is a wonderful reoccurrence here with Kate Blanchett's arrival and the sudden reoccurrence of the Lothlorien.
But here's a great moment. Listen carefully.
There it is.
There is Saruman's theme. Now, I had a great curiosity when I found out he was going to be a part of these films. I wondered how heroically do you present him in these films, because he's not yet a baddie, and you're not kind of showing your hand that he's already a villainous character or has villainous intents. I'm not even sure he does at this point. I don't know. But interestingly, Howard found a way to treat that still in that sort of minor, harmonic dress, but without making it feel too menacing.
It's still quite cold and aloof.
It's cold and aloof, but it's not threatening, and I think it's a very fine line, because you don't have this sort of cheesy, he was the great hero of all the wizards, and then he became a bad guy. He's still Saruman. You still feel that he's the same character. He still has the same disposition, maybe not the same allegiances, but it's maybe I'm reading a lot into a very short statement of a theme, but I guess that's what I do.
No.
True, but they're sort of interchangeable. It's another one where it's like, whose theme is this?
The Isengard theme was called the Isengard theme, but it was only ever related to Saruman in the original trilogy. Right?
It goes out with the orcs. I mean, you hear plenty of that over that thumping 5-beat pattern as the orcs, or the Uruk-hai move out from Isengard. But that's the only theme that he's ever associated with. So it's like part of him.
The thing I appreciate the very most about the Hobbit films, even if I have problems with its plot, its narrative choices, and some of its characters and extraneous plot points, You can never give me enough, Christopher Lee. You can never give me enough of Saruman. And this interplay of all these personalities at the table right now is always fascinating to me. It really is, because as bearers of the three rings, Gandalf and Galadriel are cheating on the conference and actually using the power of the rings to speak with telepathy to each other.
The question is, Galadriel will be presumably part of the Amazon show. Are there themes that would relate to her? Absolutely. She is always associated in this scene as well with the music from Lothlorien. Sort of a very exotic, beautiful theme. And there's some great statements of that. And we'll talk about this in film 3, but there's a very unique reuse of one of her, some material associated with her in Fellowship of the Ring that wasn't really thematic in that score, but is when it comes back in Battle of the Five Armies. I do have another question here. I'll throw this one to Jim. This may come up later, but what is the background on the Erebor bonus track that is on the special edition? Deleted scene or alternate take?
The Erebor bonus track. I believe that's one of the dwarf theme suites. So a number of sort of Shaw's original sort of sketches of themes were orchestrated and recorded at the sessions. I believe just to be bonus tracks on the album. I don't think they served any particular purpose.
Yeah, I think they're just getting some of the early material down. So there's a couple of things on there that were sort of concept things.
There is one bonus track that we will discuss a bit later on. But
yes, actually not too far from now, right?
Not too far.
A few minutes from now. This right here, this is a great example. Cliff's talking about all the, the great acting in the scene, and it really is 4 extraordinary actors in this. But it's also a great example of what Howard can bring to the table in terms of underscoring dialogue scenes. Dialogue is one of the hardest things to score in a film, because you're competing with something that's a very sonic thing. It's hard to work your way around dialogue and still be musically interesting. You just hold a pad under everything and it'll work, but it's not very interesting as music. So he does an amazing job here of really being the fifth character in this scene, of contributing a lot of important musical information, but doing this beautiful dance with these actors. That's a remarkably difficult thing to do in film, and he's another example of why he's such a master.
It is, and it's often very unfairly dismissed as filler. And it's
right.
I don't think there's any music in these films that you could really dismiss as filler.
I agree. If people are curious how I'm getting these questions, by the way, we're watching Twitter at the moment, so please feel free to use the hashtag that I forgot what I called it. What did I call it? Hobbit score questions. So if you want to tag any questions on Twitter, please feel free to, or my direct messages are open right now. Don't send me anything weird, but please feel free to ask some questions. And so far, everybody's been very kind, so thank you.
Indeed. Here's the moment of telepathy.
Yes.
That is induced by the fact that both of them are using the elven rings to do this. Well, we can only imagine that the writers in the writers' room at Amazon Studios have a lot of creative leeway to explore the rings of power and how they were made and what they do. Here we are, this heroic reiteration of the theme of leaving.
Yeah, in fact, we're going to get back into this moment here in just a second. I'll let Jim take that one too, if he would care to. We have to give him something to keep him awake. Jim's in England right now, and it's what time is it, Jim?
It's 3 a.m. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Bless your heart, Jim.
I'm trying to give Jim stuff to keep him awake. But there's a couple of unique choral texts in that last composition: the White Fire and the Lady of Lothlorien, both of which relate to Galadriel. And as we're getting into Overhill here, I will turn it over to Jim. He can explain some of this.
Underhill comes later.
We're still over at the moment.
So we discussed earlier the big shot of the hero shot from Fellowship of the Ring, which was the Fellowship going over the hills after they left Rivendell. We get the Hobbit equivalent of that in a couple of minutes, which is scored with the Misty Mountains theme. That's not the first version of that. There are several different iterations of that, using variations of the Misty Mountains theme, and very early versions using Shore's original dwarf theme. If you have the deluxe Unexpected Journey album to hand, you'll note that there is a track on there called The Edge of the Wild, which includes the first version of that scene, which includes Shore's original dwarf theme before going into the Misty Mountains theme. You will also note that it goes in a very different direction to the finished film, because it's a piece of music from the original 2-film cut of Unexpected Journey. It includes music written for the High Fells sequence when it was part of this film. So originally Gandalf left Rivendell and went straight to the High Fells, and that sequence was in this film. Ultimately, that ended up in film 2.
So you get a little repeated music
accordingly.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Another one of my very favorite moments, and a subtle change in the music, is her hands vanishing out of the frame, and then she's gone. I love that moment so much. It's the best. It's the best. I love that. It's nice to be reminded how much there is to enjoy in this film.
I think the more people get away from the comparisons between the two trilogies and let each one be its own thing, there's a lot to enjoy. I mean, not to intimate that there wasn't a lot to enjoy anyway, but just you let them stand on their own feet, and it's a nice thing. I have another question here, but I think I'll come to this one in a little bit later, because I think it'll help us near the end. I'm sorry, are you gonna? There's another question, or?
I was just going to notice this. This is the closest we get to that hero shot in Fellowship of the Ring.
Right.
They're going over the mountain.
They couldn't do the moment of everybody getting a close up, or it would have been about 9 minutes long. But there's too many.
No, this is it. If there was,
is there any pressure to match it musically or cinematically? I think there was a call for a big declamatory statement. I don't know that. I'm sure some comparisons.
I think that's as close as it gets. I mean, that's very similar to the trailer music as well.
Yes, very similar.
Mm-hmm. That caused a lot of discussion. The trailer music featuring something that was not Howard Shore.
That's actually right. That's Misty Mountains, yeah. And this is a great example of how the Misty Mountains theme can lead directly into Thorin's theme, which it just did right there. It's almost like the second half of that statement. And now we're getting into a thunder battle.
There is a lot of brass in here.
And there is a sort of a thematic idea associated with the stone giants, but I think it's another one of those ones that's hard to explain verbally. Stone giant.
This is another one of those sequences that was changed slightly when it went from being 2 films to 3 films. The very end of the sequence was made slightly longer.
Mm. When I saw these films, I think the decision to make them a trilogy rather than 2 films was maybe about 2 or 3 weeks old. But they were already cutting around it. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I think it was a fairly recent decision.
I think it was just before recording began. I think it was mid-July, and they started recording in August.
It was like really late August, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was August the 20th, 2012.
It may have been on Peter's mind because when I interviewed him at Comic-Con that year, and here we are on the very eve of virtual Comic-Con beginning now in July 2020. But Peter hedged at the press line when we asked him, and he let slip, yeah, we're thinking about making this into 3 films. At that point, he was trying not to let it out, but it must have been formulated by then. Yeah. Yeah, an incredible workout for the brass.
Yeah, this was again. You have to take your hat off to the incredible brass playing in London. These guys are just absolute monsters. Great tradition of brass playing over there.
Mm.
A lot of these young musicians come up in brass bands and things like that, doing that sort of traditional sound, and then get the symphonic jobs. And they have just such incredible technique by the time they get into the orchestral world. So you can really hear that great playing in passages like this. This is an interesting example. Peter Jackson likes to do these action scenes where there's always like one more thing. You know, you think you've cleared the main obstacle and there's something else. And usually Howard will kind of keep the music churning through those things, so it's a longer sequence. This was a unique example of where he kind of cuts out the music and lets the music also tell you, okay, it's over, everything's handled. And then you get that little stinging blast there of seeing Bilbo hanging by his fingernails. So he kind of approached the "and one more thing" action sequence in a unique way here.
I think that was a reshoot. I think I see.
It's not the same room. Most of the Lord of the Rings was recorded in Watford in the town hall. This was, I believe, entirely recorded in Studio One in Abbey Road. They did vocal sessions in Abbey Road for Lord of the Rings, but not much by way of orchestra. So it's actually a different spot.
I think there were a few orchestra sessions at Abbey Road for Return of the King, but I think most, as you say, everything else was at Watford.
And a little bit at Ayr Lyndhurst as well.
Yeah. I think for Unexpected Journey, some of the choral stuff was Ayr Lyndhurst.
Some of the Rivendell stuff, I think, there's a little bit of orchestral writing. And in fact, I think one of the Battle of the Pelennor Fields sessions might have been moved into Ayr Lyndhurst, which is not really large enough to handle the size of the orchestra that they had in there. Yeah. And I hear unpleasant legends of a harp meeting an untimely end due to somebody tripping over it in a session, which we won't discuss here.
I think at the time of recording Unexpected Journey, the Watford Coliseum was not available for recording. I think it was pure
renovation, right?
It was either renovation or it was just a music and dance venue at the time. But I believe it's open for recording again now.
They used to have to clear out of there for Lord of the Rings on, I think it was Friday nights, because at like 8 p.m. it became a disco. So they would literally lower the mirror ball and kick the orchestra out.
Yeah, wow. I think if I remember correctly.
I don't know. I mean, these things, technology changes, recording technology. Mic placement is a whole art unto itself, and they do try different things. You know, the ensemble is a different size, things like that. There's different players. It's always different.
I think quite a fair amount of it comes down to the mastering of the album as well.
And that's true too. Yeah. But these things, I mean, the recording. You know, again, I'll go back to the nerdy film music circles, but if you go to the original Star Wars trilogy, the last of those, Return of the Jedi, was recorded very differently than the other two and sounds quite different as a result. Sometimes it's just the room. Yeah.
Again, Return of the Jedi was recorded at Abbey Road, and the other two were done at Anvil.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is a quick reminder that the score for An Unexpected Journey was recorded in London, and the other 2 films were recorded in New Zealand. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So now we're getting into Underhill. Oh, Bit of business from Cliff, station ID.
No, go ahead, Justin.
That's what. Yeah, he's asking you to do it because he's not. His voice isn't being recorded. He's not mic'd.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the 2-hour mark. Exactly. Welcome again. This is station identification for the OneRing.net. You are watching Torn Tuesday, and we have a very special, unique episode going on right now. Thank you for joining us. It is a live stream watching The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, extended edition, with the great company of Jim and Doug, who have such a background working on the recordings and the music with Howard Shore, and pending the publication of the music of the Hobbit films. We are here to enrich the discussion about Howard Shore's themes, leitmotifs, and the approach to the recording music, the digital process, the visual process, and everything in between. And even from time to time, we're lucky enough to talk about the shape of the music. We're learning what these things are. We're in Goblin Town. We've just arrived at the trap door at the front porch of Goblin Town, and we're at 2 minutes and 1 second. You can see the little countdown clock. So if you want to turn on your Blu-ray player, you can fast forward the movie, join us right at this chapter, and follow along.
Music here does not really. The music here doesn't really have any shape at all.
Right, and by design,
it's very jagged. It's very
yeah,
it's very
shambolic,
very mixed metered.
A ton of that aleatoric stuff. Yeah,
I think it's almost entirely aleatoric in places.
There's a theme that comes up here, and you can actually hear it more in the theatrical version than you can hear it in the extended edition, where there's a sort of it's a theme that's in 3 beats per measure over an ostinato that's constantly shifting time signatures, usually in 5. And I think there's at one point a concept of making maybe 11 or something like that, a number that would be associated with the goblins, but it ended up just going with these sort of jagged random numbers that are constantly changing and not lining up quite right. But this theme sort of is dialed out when the Goblin King's song comes in this version of the film, and that doesn't play into the theatrical version. So you get a little bit more of that in the earlier cut of the film, and of course it's still on the album in its original concept.
Bilbo's first goblin. His first sword fight ever. He's absolutely terrified. Yeah. And he managed to hold up all right, barely.
I think this is just about the first bit they shot for these films, isn't it? You can hear great examples of that aleatoric style of writing and that crazy trumpet stuff you're hearing in there.
Mm-hmm. That's what you call aleatoric.
Right, and now here's the theme that kind of goes with Goblin Town, but you only get a little bit of it here.
Well, we get the extra songs by the Goblin King, too.
You sure do.
Yeah.
So see, kind of the theme began, and then it kind of disappears in this version of the film. Written for muted trombones and stopped French horns. You jam your fist into the bell and create this pinched, violent tone.
Yeah. So going back to the aleatoric stuff, the instructions on the score itself are that aleatoric sections may be performed using any selection or combination of the following performance techniques.
I'm gonna cut you off because he doesn't want that read. I've tried this trick before. They don't want the exact instructions out there. So
anyway,
sorry.
This is referred to as the manifesto.
Correct. We can talk about the Goblin King instead if you want to. Did they try to make it sound like a bigger space? Oh, interesting. I think, was this the section where they mapped out the reverb inside an actual cave and used that as their, the reverb in the sequence, yeah. So this is another song that Howard Shore was not a part of. This is, I think this is another Stephen Gallagher, but I apologize if I'm wrong about that.
I wanted all the songs in here. This this crazy performance by the Goblin King is unexpected, but it takes me back to the Rankin and Bass film from 1977, where they were singing an all-male vocal setup, singing merrily down, down to Goblin Town. It works for me. Barry Humphries is having much more fun than he deserves to have, obviously.
I think the cartoons were the first exposure I had to any of Tolkien's work, and I don't remember much about watching the cartoons, although I think I had plenty of nightmares about the little lizardy Gollum interpretation for possibly for years after that. I'm not sure.
Voiced by Brother Theodore.
Yes.
I'm very, very fond of those scores by Maury Laws. He did a lot
Maury
of
Law is
scoring for
known
Rankin
for all the little stop motion Christmas cartoons as well. Yeah,
That's
or
him.
puppet
stuff.
animation. What do they call that? So they had a name for it.
Animagic.
Animagic. Thank you. Yeah.
Animagic. Yes.
So I believe we come up to next Riddles in the Dark, which is one of my favorite sequences in the Hobbit films. The music underwent a good bit of alteration in here, but we'll talk to that as we get into
it. Many people are shocked when they get to see a picture of Dame Edna side by side with a picture of this guy.
Yeah, quite a vocal range for Barry Humphries.
Quite a comedy range too. He's great.
He's one of the sharks in Finding Nemo as well, isn't he?
I think so.
I think he is.
I think so. Yes. In the chat, Jason tells us that the very first shot of Hobbit on day one of principal photography was Bilbo looking at Gollum from behind the mushrooms. Gollum was trying to get a snack.
Okay, so that's coming up in a few minutes here.
Coming up.
Okay. A rare extended sequence with no score here. It doesn't happen too often in these films.
I think that may be the longest section with no music in the entire film.
Yeah.
I've noticed that. This is the longest stretch without any score.
It's a, no matter how they mix this thing, it is a very noisy scene, so I imagine it's, music didn't really need to be in there for most of it as well, although here it comes.
I am suddenly reminded of the Adventures of Baron Munchausen, where the Sultan has this torture device, which is really his organ. When he plays it, it has mallets and hammers that beat the slaves inside the box, and they go, "Ooh, ah!" And it makes the tones of what the Sultan is playing, and it's a very Monty Python moment, obviously.
There was
Terry Gilliam.
There was indeed a Monty Python sketch where Terry Jones was playing the mouse organ.
I think there was a Muppet phone on the Muppet Show as well. A bunch of Muppets being injured by sort of marimba setup. So
At some point, I thought the Goblin King was going to start banging on some of these goblins' heads to get different musical tones out. But at some point.
There are a lot of cuts of this. It may have been in there at some point. I don't know.
Oh, and then we get to meet our little goblin scribe, who is Kieran Shaw. That is the motion capture performance of Kieran Shaw, who was the body double, scale double for Frodo and several other characters.
And who also appears in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yes, that's right. Without any prosthetics, you get to have him right there.
There is that first shot. The very first shot of photography is Martin Freeman waking up in the mushroom fungus pile.
I have a question here about when the dwarves are fleeing Goblin Town. Is the choir singing in Dwarvish? I can tell you exactly what they're singing, but I have to flip a few pages.
Gollum's pale, glowing eyes are absolutely brilliant. Brilliantly captured with Gollum sneaking into the scene with that pale, just the way that Tolkien describes it in the book, that pale luminescence in his eyes in the darkness. It's great.
So I'll come to this in a little bit, but the dwarves fleeing Goblin Town is actually in Black speech. An unusual choice for something like that, but it's certainly
really
well within the storytelling. I'll talk about that in a little bit.
Oh, there it is. Isildur's Bane.
Now here we get some nice ring material, I think, don't we?
We do a little later. We get some of Gollum's menace here. So
right, yeah, I didn't mean exactly in that shot, but yeah. The cimbalum or cymbalum is an instrument that's very similar to a hammered dulcimer, if anybody's familiar with that instrument. It's like basically a tabletop with wires stretched across it. You play with these little delicate hammers. Cimbalum being larger and more, it's a chromatic instrument, meaning you would have like, imagine a piano, both the black notes and the white notes.
Mm-hmm.
And here comes a little bit of the history of the ring.
There it is.
Yeah, classic Lord of the Rings stuff here. But anyways, the cimbalum, Hungarian instrument, is associated very strongly with the one of the personalities of Gollum. More of a menacing aspect to it.
But it's still connected to hobbits because the
correct. The dulcimer is used for the hobbits.
The dulcimer is part of the
right.
Hobbit band.
Yeah, so that's Howard being anthropological there and showing the connection between Gollum's history and the history of the Shire. The Hobbit music or the Shire music uses a lot of those types of instruments, the dulcimer, the mandolins, guitars, tin whistles, things like that, the sort of vaguely Celtic assortment of instruments.
Many friends of mine called this part of the movie Riddles in the Gloom.
I think this is another wonderful acting showcase here. I think both actors are absolutely superb in this moment, or this scene, I should say.
Yes. Yes, well, ladies and gentlemen, we are 2 hours and 12 minutes into the film, and we have gotten to what many consider the apex of the storytelling, the riddles in the dark.
It does make you wonder how long this film would be if the entire trilogy was condensed to 2 films.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I imagine the troll scene would be half as long, and the Dol Guldur stuff would be cut for the extended edition. All those things would have happened.
So we do have a question here. I'm backing up on some of these older questions.
Yes.
Why are there some differences between the album and the score in the film? We did go over that a little bit, but that's largely related to logistics deadlines. The album had to be locked and sent to the manufacturers before the film had to be locked. So sometimes you got earlier versions of some of these things. That happened a little bit in Lord of the Rings, but to a much lesser extent.
Some of it comes down to composer preference as well, I think.
And it does certainly come down to composer preference. That's absolutely correct. But there's also the logistics of the fact that physical media doesn't sell like it used to these days. Everybody wants streaming and Spotify and things like that. So there are fewer plants these days that press CDs. Mm-hmm. So they have a long line of you'll have a little tiny window. We can mass produce this CD for 2 weeks in October, November, whatever. And once you get on that schedule, you're on that schedule. You have to get your album done in time. Right. And that applied to my work as well. That's why I had to do these things months before the films were finished. And I would be literally doing liner note rewrites until the middle of the night of the day they were due. I would even be getting notes from Peter Jackson sometimes of, can you not mention this? We don't want to talk about this until film 3, or can you change this phrasing this way? I mean, these people were quite passionate about these things and wanted everything to be presented in an exact manner. But we had a deadline, and if we'd missed that deadline, even if I got more notes from Peter Jackson, I could change things. It was a done deal. So yeah, I mean, it's funny how many of these things come down to such dull things as when is the plant open? But much as we like to imagine the worlds of the arts being these sort of anything is possible pie in the sky type of places, there's realities always. And this is another one where the album is fairly different in a lot of spots. This music ended up being very similar to some of the other Gollum scenes from the Two Towers. There's some similarities here, or at least some relationships. A question following up on the CD question: will the theatrical versions ever be released? I don't know. Maybe. I don't. Right now, there aren't any other Hobbit releases in the pipeline. That doesn't mean it could never happen. Certainly, it's very possible. But as Jim correctly says, I think a lot of times the versions that are on the albums are the versions that Howard Shore preferred anyway. He thought of those as the versions he had originally composed before they sort of conformed things to kind of the filmmaker's wishes, which is a totally legitimate part of the process. But it's nice to have the composer able to present their concept as well. So maybe I don't know. Anything could happen.
I was going to ask, is there any reoccurrence of Gollum or Smeagol themes here in this scene that we would have heard? Yes,
all over the place. This is
all over the
place. The Timbalam theme, or the menace of Gollum, and the more the sadder pity of Gollum theme shows up a little bit as well. So this is all classic Gollum themes, all the sort of stuff we heard in the Lord of the Rings, and nicely punctuated with some of the new Bilbo themes, which thanks to Howard Shore's genius, they fit in with one another just perfectly.
That's great. To have a playground of dialogue between these two characters, a battle of wits, was an opportunity for Howard to actually play with, counterpointing the two motifs for both of these characters.
Right. And a little bit of ring music in here as well. Of course, that's the silent third character in the scene, I guess, the ring itself.
Indeed.
I think as this was originally written, the ring material was a little less prominent, maybe not quite as on the nose as it is in the final version.
Yeah, as we say, that was one of the great discussions of how much does this feel like its own thing? How much does it need to echo the specific tone of Lord of the Rings? And then they went back and forth on these things, And it can be as simple as like Jim says, how much do you play up? The ring's always in this scene. Do you need to hit it musically? Well, if you want it to feel a little bit more like Lord of the Rings, use that theme quite a bit. Lean on that theme. If you want it to feel like it's a separate thing and it's the Hobbit and has maybe a vague relationship, but it's different, don't use that theme as much. So there's many ways to skin a cat, of course. So.
Indeed.
Some great sort of stunted statements of Gollum material there. The original ending for movie 1 was after the barrels. It was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is correct. The big action sequence of the barrels out of Bond was going to be the big, exciting climax of the third act.
It was. There was actually some music written for that at the time of film 1, leading up to the barrel escape, which would have been intercut with Gandalf exploring Dol Guldur.
Right. It did smooth the beginning of scoring on Desolation of Smaug, that he had some of the material already lined up and some of the scenes even sort of at least semi-completed. Some of them are complete, entirely complete. The question of the Misty Mountain theme has come up again, so one more time I will say that was the theme of this first leg of the journey. And to say, I told you that was a big question, and that's fine. People are curious, but it takes them in the first part of the journey, takes them up to the Misty Mountains, and then we sort of switch thematically after that. And if people are still trying to ask me questions, I can't figure out how I'm getting all these questions, you can go to Twitter And most people seem like they just want to direct message me, but you can also use the tag hashtag Hobbit score questions. So whatever you like.
Now the riddle game has come to an end, and the level of threat seems to be changing. And this is an opportunity here, I'm sure, where Howard thought this is where the stakes are going to change for Bilbo.
Hmm. Jim, invite him over. You're the only two up watching this movie right now, I think.
Well, I assume he has coffee on standby as well.
Yeah, as well he should, yeah.
It's not Torn Tuesday here, it's Torn Wednesday.
Yes.
Yeah, cheers to anybody that's in a time zone that this is early Wednesday. You were troopers. Thank you for hanging in there. So here you can hear again the low strings taking some of the kind of gal material and giving it a little heavier tone. He's taking a turn character-wise here and getting very, very upset. His playfulness is over. Now you can hear them. He's kind of combining the pity theme with little suggestions of the ring theme.
It's one of those very typical Shaw string divises in there as well.
Yeah. Jim's referring to in a typical orchestral setting, you would have 5 string voices: violin 1, violin 2, viola, cello, and bass. But of course, you have a number of players in each one of those parts, and Howard likes to divide it so violin 1, instead of playing 1 pitch, is playing 14 pitches, or whatever, and you create these huge, thick divisions of the string parts.
Really?
Yeah, a very unique Howard sound. He loves to divide the strings into clusters like that. And we have more goblin singing. We're going to have some great Gandalf material coming up here.
Oh,
This is a wonderful statement of both Gandalf the Grey and the Istari theme, I believe.
oh, that's great.
Yeah. Now, when Gandalf first arrives here, of course, he creates a bit of a wonderful moment. Chaos. And the original version of this I saw, the Goblin King was injured and returned, having lost his arm, but strapped on 2 smaller goblins onto his arm to serve as sort of a weapon. But I guess they decided they had enough loss of arms and fingers in these movies already. So that's the Gandalf theme, and here comes the Istari theme.
There it is.
There we go. Kind of a suggestion of it. And into the Misty Mountains.
What a great transition. Themes 1, 2, 3, back to back.
Yep,
Wow.
Yeah.
From this point on, it's a lot of wall-to-wall action.
Oh, yes. Lots of it.
And as I was saying before, there is a vocal element that shows up here. It's an unusual choice. Most of the music accompanying dwarves is in Khuzdul, but for the goblin battle, the goblins don't have their own language that they speak in these films, so they went with black speech.
Yes.
And a text just titled Goblin Battle, which begins, "Can you smell their fear, this dwarf scum?" So you can you can listen to a chorus singing the word scum in black speech.
Now back to Bilbo trying to find his way out of the caves.
Right.
Our
And this
timer
composition
on our
is brass
screen.
buttons.
Yes, there's beautiful brass buttons about to squeeze and pop off. Our timer might be a little bit different. The one on our YouTube channel says 2:24. My Blu-ray says 2:25, but we're still within the same minute.
There's the ring theme.
There it is.
Right onto his finger.
That sort of lumbering, odd-metered goblin town material will come back very shortly.
Right.
This somewhat more forceful this time.
Some of that we refer to as the hammering pattern.
Yep.
Seeing as the
There we
goblins seem quite fond of hammering things.
This is our first time visually being in the Twilight realm of the Ring. If you were watching the films with The Hobbit first and Lord of the Rings later.
Yeah, chronologically, yeah.
Mhm.
A lot of aleatoric writing in this as well. You could hear that trumpet, muted trumpet there chattering away.
Mm-hmm. I like that sound, that chattering trumpet,
Right.
that agitated sound. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great way to create that sort of, it's a very unsteady texture, but it fits in fine with these sort of chaotic, both visuals and sound mix.
Mm-hmm.
Did you spot the obligatory Wilhelm in there?
Of course.
Yeah.
Was the Goblin theme similar to the Uruk theme? They both play with the idea of odd meters. So yeah, I think that's probably fair to say in a manner. But that again goes to the way that like score groups certain elements in these scores. Like certain ages have a certain harmonic language. There's mixed meters go with some of these corrupted, nasty little creatures and things like that. So yeah, it's part of his overall concept. Here's our goblin battle text. Probably some similarities to the Moria sequence and those low chanting voices.
I think I'd forgotten how crazy this sequence was.
Sort of dizzying, yeah.
It's insane. That's the last iteration of Misty Mountains right there with the boulder, right?
That's an excellent question. Where is the last statement of Misty Mountains?
I think that might be it.
I think there is another softer one later on.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's
This is
a
the-
somber statement of once they get out of the mountain, but this is the last big heroic statement, right?
It is indeed.
Yes.
I know there's been some speculation that that's tracked in from somewhere else, but it was written to go there.
Mm-hmm.
It's perfect because it goes straight from the cutting of the boulder right to the Goblin King's sudden reappearance.
Yes. Yeah.
This is my favorite bit. He slices his gut open and says, "That'll do it." So funny to me. I don't know why.
This is their sort of Pirates of the Caribbean sequence here.
Yeah.
So in a moment here, we will get into the out of the frying pan composition. Not quite yet, but that's the next one up. There's a great moment here when they're out of the mountain and Gandalf is counting up to see if all the dwarves are present, and he notices that Bilbo is missing. The harmonies beneath that are A minor and G minor, which are harmonies you hear associated with the dwarves quite a bit in the later films. So it's another thing of Howard sort of laying groundwork for things that come later in the story. I think we got about a half an hour left on these. If anybody has any questions that they want answered specific to this score, the hashtag on Twitter is Hobbit Score Questions, and my direct messages are open, so drop me a line if you care to. Because right after this, Jim needs to get some sleep.
Indeed.
Are you up for the day, Jim, or are you just going to go right into Wednesday now?
Well, I think I may try and get some sleep. That would probably be sensible.
That's probably a good idea.
And so
Yes,
Bilbo's
that is-
pity
yeah,
has
and that's-
saved the lives of many here.
That theme right there is the pity of Gollum.
The pity of Gollum, yes.
Mm-hmm. One of the first themes you hear in the first few minutes, I guess, or the first sequence of Fellowship of the Ring. Under the first Gollum shots. And there's a bit of similar music to when Gandalf tells Frodo about the pity in Moria.
And here we go. Bum, bum, bum.
Jim, is this tracked?
Yes,
I thought so. That's the end of Radagast, isn't it?
it is. And there's a little patch that was just recorded to cover the gap between this and Out of the Frying Pan, I think.
Yeah, the album has the original concept.
Yeah,
of all
it
of
does.
this,
There's another little tracked bit.
So we're coming up into the conclusion, which is mostly based on themes that are elsewhere in the score. We have Misty Mountains, we have the Dol Guldur thirds for Azog, some Hobbit material, a couple of themes that'll come back from Lord of the Rings that we'll talk about those in a moment. We also have a theme that is kind of associated with this action sequence, associated with the pine tree sequence coming up here. So another classical music in-joke, I titled it The Pines of Middle-earth, because there's a very famous classical piece named The Pines of Rome.
The Pines of Rome.
Yeah,
Yes.
Respighi, a wonderful piece. Yeah, very good, very
Yes.
good.
Well,
So
of course.
again, if people are doubly nerdy and have an interest in both classical music and film music, then hopefully they'll find some of these little.
It was also a sequence that was rather bizarrely animated by the Disney team for Fantasia 2000. And it featured a pod of humpbacked whales that flew up into the heavens.
Nary a pine tree to be found.
Nary a tree and anywhere. So this is the opportunity for the film to the change. Now, this was the big change, that the film was not going to end its storytelling after the barrel's out of bond. It has to emotionally wrap itself up after this spectacular sequence with the eagles.
Mhm.
And the musical task at hand had to change. I wonder what it was like for poor Howard Shore when suddenly they said, well, we did it that way, now we're going to do it this way. And this has to be the impact of the end of our film. Was there a lot of stuff going back and redoing things at that point?
Well, yes, this is definitely a sequence where the film version and the album versions have a lot of differences that fans have noticed, especially probably the most famous difference, which we'll come to in a moment here. But this is definitely a section where I think we being the music people, consider the album versions are really what Howard originally intended for these things, and sort of what we consider the sort of canon version of the music, if I can use that phrase.
Yeah.
The
Warg material is back here.
Right. Yeah. This is not tracked. This is just a recap of Warg writing that Howard used.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the Pines of Middle Earth.
Yeah, that's right. Good.
Yeah.
Indeed.
So I guess we'll get into it a little bit more here, but there's a sequence here where you see Thorin marching down the tree to face Azog. And in the film, we're going to hear a statement of the material that's the ring wraith material from the Lord of the Rings films. It's been sort of reshaped and rewritten here. It's a new setting. But that was indeed a rewrite. The original version of this, the original compositional intention, is what you hear on the album, which I believe is more. There's a relationship sort of to the battle outside of Moria. It kind of connects their, the face-off from years and years ago. The rewrite there was a request from the filmmakers, as Cliff correctly interpreted, put a bigger thump on the end of this score, since this now became the end of film one. The choral text is changed, and the intention was, people always get very confused, why is this ring wraith music playing under Thorin?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thought process was that music was meant to relate to Azog. It was meant to relate to his connection to Dol Guldur and the Necromancer and all that, which people forget at this point had really not been fully revealed. And that was part of the reason that we didn't want to get too much into that, and we're asked not to get too much into that at the end of film one, is because it wasn't exactly a huge surprise if people knew this series that the Necromancer had his fingers and everything, but that connection between Azog was not yet fully established, so they didn't want us to get into that too much. But that was the idea, that the music is actually playing to Azog here, not to Thorin. And there is a different text here that relates to Azog, and the fact that Thorin thought he had defeated this foe and he's back and all that sort of thing. So that's really where that all came from. That's the long-standing question. Oh, and somebody is sending me a message that they love the references to the classical music stuff, so that makes me feel good. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And they have the same question about the ring wraiths. So good. Yeah, I got both of them.
Yeah, I'll talk with you all day long about Rimsky-Korsakov and Mozart and everybody in between, and then we'll spend another hour talking about Dvorak's Ninth Symphony, and we'll go on. We'll go on from there.
Jim will never sleep again.
Sorry, Jim, I love you.
I'm never going to sleep again with the amount of coffee I've had.
Yeah, maybe. Did you finish the carafe? Is that gone?
I did.
Oh,
goodness. A question from the chat says, starting at 2 hours 47, I must know what the lyrics are the chorus is singing, or where I can find out what they are, please, and thank you.
2 hours 41?
Yeah, 2 hours 41.
Oh, could they specify what scene that is? I don't know the timestamps quite like that.
Okay.
Or do I?
No, even Jim doesn't know that. He's usually the numbers guy.
I'm thinking.
Well, we're at what, 340 now? Or no, that's not 340. That's the composition. We're at, I don't know. That was a while ago.
Okay, we'll find out.
Yeah, I asked them if they could clarify.
I'd like to also add that it is the power of the elven ring, Narya, the ring of fire, which contributes to Gandalf being able to light these pine cones this way.
Yeah.
And of course, his work with fireworks, and earlier in the film when he lights his own pipe with his own thumb, it's all an extension of the elven ring and its power. At least in my mind, I believe it is.
The dwarves are singing a little bit, or the male voices singing dwarvish music here, sing a little bit about Erebor. Toward the sky, above all else, this mountain lies, singing in Khuzdul, the dwarvish language.
Yes, I think they're definitely talking about. Well, it's about to come up. It's the part where Thorin is facing down Azog, and we just
was
discussed
that the question? They're talking
Yes.
about the Azog
Yeah,
thing?
They're
Okay.
talking about the reappearance of what is known as the Ring Wraith music.
Right,
But
right.
it's referring to Dol Guldur and the origin of Azog and the origin of the real
Azog's
evil
source
there.
of his power, right? And
Yes.
I'm that text actually does reappear in the third film in a composition that's it was a composition that was true to Howard Shore's intent. So that's in the book where we actually discuss that theme. So I'm gonna here it is right now.
Here it is right
I will
now,
save
yeah.
that until we get to its reappearance. But it's essentially singing the concept of the foe that you thought you defeated is back and he's alive. So I can completely understand why people are confused. The theme begins under Thorin, and Thorin is certainly the character that we're relating to here. But the thought was this music is really about Azog.
Well, Azog is an extension of a Ring Wraith. He is one of Sauron's most powerful servants at this time. Yes.
That's what we're talking about.
That is what we are talking about right now.
And again, if you want to hear Howard Shore's original composition, his original intention, where the music is more related to Thorin and Thorin's comprehension of that, which is he's seeing an old foe. He's not thinking about where did that foe get his power necessarily. He's just fighting him. So it relates back to the Battle of Moria instead. And it's a great brass fanfare in there too.
I love it.
I'm always surprised this didn't finish off Thorin. That seems pretty violent. Those dwarves can take a licking.
If an alligator can have so many pounds of pressure per square inch with its jaws, imagine how much that thing has.
Yeah, we just get hit in the face with something too.
Indeed.
We're coming up here shortly to another bit that was some rewritten material. Some of this eagle stuff was and nature stuff was rewritten a bit. You'll hear a different version in the film than you hear in the score. And there is a theme coming up at the end of this that references back to some Return of the King material, and I'll talk about that. It's not as cut and dry as some of these other things, but we can get into it. That's fine.
This is still the original material here. I think we cut the rewrite in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, and you actually hear kind of an interesting setting of some of the Shire material on Bilbo's leap there. And this is the more material related to the dwarves, these arpeggiated figures. It's the same music you hear when you see the dwarves wandering outside of Erebor in the beginning of the film.
This is the last iteration of Misty Mountains. Here it is.
Mm-hmm. I think this is different on the album as well.
I think that's tracked.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think we...
Here we come with Nature's Reclamation. This
is the rewrite now. So
Yeah,
the
this is
version
the
on the
rewrite.
album is quite different.
Yes. This sticks a little bit closer to some of the music you hear near the end of the Two Towers. Similar to the Ents tearing the dam down outside of Isengard and all that.
Ah, the eagles, the great majesty
eagles.
of these creatures.
Some very Philip Glass stuff going on in the flutes there.
I'll say. Another one of my favorite shots in the film is Thorin being carried away like that.
Mm. This is more stuff that people often ask, will we ever get a release of this version of things? Oh, we've got somebody here who works for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra following along tonight, so that's pretty cool. And a film score nerd, so cheers to you. That's great. Emily, thank you, Emily. That's awesome.
Excellent.
And we need to get all these orchestras back to work soon, I hope.
Yes, yes, indeed. Another fantastic opportunity to let the New Zealand landscape accompany the music.
Yes, yeah. So there's a moment coming up here in a few minutes where you hear a quote of material that's from the end of The Return of the King, the fall of the tower and all that. And it appears, I think, with Thorin embracing Bilbo and, never was I so wrong and all this sort of thing. And there have been questions, what is the thematic connection? That theme was about the fall of the tower and the destruction of the ring and all that. And the answer is a little bit oblique. It is a very rare moment for these scores where there's not a sort of, in-text use of these themes. And what does it mean? That theme was a specific theme that related to the fall of the tower and the Return of the King. Here, it's used more as musical material than as narrative material. And that's a rare thing, and maybe this is just about the only time it happens, just about, in any of these Middle-earth scores by Howard Shore. It is not without precedent. These things do happen in other composers' works. Wagner did such things in his ring operas. The most famous example for film music nerds is probably What Music Do You Hear When Darth Vader cuts down Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars? You hear Princess Leia's theme. Not because it has anything to do with her, and by John Williams' admission, acknowledgement, because the emotional content was correct for that moment. So this is a very rare and unique moment in these scores where that same sort of things happen. It's musical content that felt right, but doesn't really have a textual connection or a narrative connection. So you can either embrace that as a perfectly logical reason, or you can say, well, that's a bit of an excuse, isn't it? But that was the approach. That was the approach.
Yeah. Again, this is one of those little moments that I think took a while to get right. There are at least 3 other versions of it.
We can do a quick question while this moment's coming up. Someone asks why Bilbo's fuller pastoral theme doesn't get much play in this first score. Most of the new Bilbo themes kind of played second fiddle, no pun intended, to the use of the Shire theme. Here's our bit of that Return of the King music. Again, the tower is not falling, the ring's not being destroyed, but emotionally, musically, it made sense in this moment, so they did use it. But yeah, the Bilbo was given his own character themes, but it ended up being more represented by the Shire theme, scored in the way that the Hobbits are scored in the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
And there's the carrack, the famous, distinct, subtle bear shape in the rock.
That's right, yeah.
Of the carrack.
So some nice Erebor music here.
Ah, yes, indeed.
There's a interesting moment here. You can hear female voices as you see the thrush flying toward Erebor. And they're not using a full choral text, but they are singing in Sindarin. I'll give you just the English translation, but what has happened? So it's a uniquely ominous text here at the end. It seems like it's a big, beautiful ending, but we're sort of building into the opening of Smaug's eye. So the chorus is giving us a little heads up that something is amiss here. more Thorin material, Erebor material, all that type of stuff. This is a great moment. It's very still in the visuals, and Howard could have put something quite propulsive behind this, done the old Elmer Bernstein trick like Magnificent Seven, and give a lot of rhythmic music behind this to drive it along. But he lets this sit here, and it's a great way to take what is it's a happy ending. They think they've made it to the other side, but it gives that strange stillness and darkness. And here we're going to get 2 bits of Smaug material in the original concept for this scene: the furnace chords and Smaug the Magnificent. But in this, we have silence.
We get silence.
Yeah, we get the sound of coins
and
then the song. Yeah.
And there is the end, directed by Peter Jackson. And wow, that was quite a journey.
We made it.
That was quite a journey.
On the subject of Bilbo's themes, while we're here, if anyone feels like sticking around for the credits, you do get some nice statements at the very end.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. What can folks do to support you, Jim and Doug, especially supporting your effort in getting closer to the publication of the music of The Hobbit?
Keep it in the discussion, I suppose. I mean,
yes.
I think there are a lot of people in the arts that are having a far rougher time of things than we are right now. So I would hate to feel like we're begging for handouts or anything like that. So if you have money to burn and want to throw your support around, support your local arts organizations and your symphonies and your museums and things like that. But if you want to keep the music of the Hobbit films in the discussion, so that when better days are upon us, maybe somebody feels like pulling the trigger on it, sure, that'd be great. But take care of those who need it right now.
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
I'll just echo Doug's sentiments there, but also point out that we are coming up to some very big anniversaries in terms of Middle-earth movies.
Yes, we are.
20th anniversary of Fellowship next year. 10th anniversary of The Hobbit the year after.
Shocking. Yeah.
So if we can keep the momentum going, perhaps we can make some interesting things happen.
Yeah. We started the celebrations last year because we had the 20th anniversary of Principal Photography. We had that gathering where we had Mark Ordesky and Sala Baker and Jim Rigel, and of course all the folks, Mr. Behind the Scenes himself, Michael Pellerin, and Rick Porras. They all came and
Rick, great.
All the folks that Josh Gad had recently gotten together for his little reunion show. Later this year in December, there will be much bigger celebrations for the 20th release of Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, I know people always, middle-aged people love to say that time passed so quickly, I don't know how it happened, but it really feels like the blink of an eye. It's amazing to me that we've gotten decades past the beginning of these things. It feels like it's always been with us, but it feels like we just worked on these things. It's amazing.
It feels like I was just an 11-year-old kid who just cracked open The Hobbit for the first time. Sometimes those moments still happen, especially when I go back and read the book again.
Yeah.
And I tell you, and any other fan within this fandom will tell you how frequently they play Howard Shore's music from these films all the time when picking up and reading again. It is part of the culture now. It is such a part of the mortar between the bricks of who we are as a fandom. And that's why we have so much questions coming at us about what musical choices Amazon Studios might make in the future with their unknown adaptation of the Second Age.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly it would be wonderful to see them keep that the tradition of Howard's work going. To me, I'm a musician, so I look at all these things as a musical entities anyway. But it's absolutely wonderful that these scores to these films, all 6 of them, they're the connective tissue between everything. You can see any interpretation of these stories, and somehow the score seems perfectly matched to it. If I read it, I want to hear the scores. If I watch it, I want to hear the scores. If I see a different version of it I want to hear these scores. To me,
Yes.
this music is a completely integral part of it all.
Absolutely. Agreed. Before I let you gentlemen go, because I know it is time, Jim. But there's a wonderful...
Wait, Jim, clock check real quickly. What time is it?
It's 4:06.
Bless your heart.
I suspect the sun will be coming up behind me very shortly.
One
But
beautiful
we've got
acknowledgement.
we've got this far. We might as well get to the end of the credits.
Yes, we should. We should. I'm very much enjoying. Well, we don't have to do the extended. If there's fan club credits that go on for 20 more minutes, we'll not do that. But
Not this time. Not this time. We're safe.
One of our long time audience members who's been with us in our community on the OneRing.net and with our live audience for over 7-8 years. Her name is Karen Graber, and she says, "This was great. Thank you,
good.
Jim Ware and Doug Adams, and of course, Cliff and Justin. I can't wait to watch The Desolation of Smaug and talk about the music. Again, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Graber. That was a
That's
lovely
very
applause.
kind. Thank you. Yeah.
Very nice
Yeah,
indeed.
it's a pleasure.
From Wales, Kieran Owen, who's been watching from Wales. He's up with you. My friend Kieran, who is in the little village of Holyhead, Wales, right now, says, "It went amazing, man. Wonderful. It's been going
Cool.
very well. They've been enjoying the show. There are lots of folks who've been staying with us.
We'll get to hear some Welsh accents in the next one, so they'll feel very at home.
It is the subject of endless admiration that Howard Shore managed to do what you said he did, Doug, that he is managing this matrix, this encyclopedic level of different leitmotifs and bringing them together in 6 films. And it's just such an amazing endeavor. And it's also amazing that you two guys got so close to the process. Really, it's fantastic.
I mean, it was really the thrill of a lifetime. I grew up as a musician with a deep passion for film music and a desire to see it treated more seriously. The invitation to do something like this and to be able to be a very, very tiny part of the production and be involved with that sort of that pride and caring and passion and artistry. I don't know that I will ever be able to be a part of something that fills me with such creative satisfaction in that way. Maybe, who knows? But it was really an experience beyond description. I entered my adulthood in a way doing these things. I got to travel the world and make friends all over the place and be a part of these things that mean so much to me and to other people. It's like sharing your baby pictures with other people and the whole world loves them. These are all things that are very personal to me, and to see them touch other people, it's beautiful. It really means a lot to me.
Indeed. Well said. Jim, are you there, sir?
I am indeed. Yeah. I mean, I've been following these things for so long now, and it was amazing to be a little part of Doug's process in terms of producing this book and having access to some of this material. It's great that these things are being kept alive like this.
Jim's been a huge part of making these things come together, and just being an endless source of support and someone to bounce ideas off of and offer a lot of his own creative ideas. It's these really are family endeavors, and Jim's part of the family, and it's a wonderful thing.
Indeed. Now, here we are at the lead texture artists, the senior paint and rotoscope artists.
We should do some random shout outs.
Good job to Robin Stewart Cape. Well done with the rotoscoping. If you're watching tonight. In the films, no, although I was watching, I knew I was in the credits for the behind the scenes stuff for Smaug. I was watching it on Unexpected Journey earlier this week, and I realized I'm in the credits. I didn't know I was in there. Right next to Elijah.
Doug is credited in Martin Scorsese's Hugo.
I am in
Oh,
Hugo. That's right. Yeah.
That's nice. Here it is. Music recorded and mixed at Abbey Road Studios, London, performed by the London Philharmonic Orchestra and the choir master, Simon Toyne.
Yeah, there's
It's a lot of music.
It's a lot of music, and there's a lot of wonderful people up there too that have been hugely helpful over the years.
Blunt the Knives was written by Stephen Gallagher.
That's right.
That's right.
Stephen, who I think may have been planning to watch this evening, or he was going to catch it later. So
he also wrote the Torture Song and the Goblin Town song.
That's right. Yeah,
Great.
A New Zealand composer, does a lot of work.
It's fantastic.
Lovely, friendly guy too. So here we're getting into some of the Bilbo material, right?
Here it is. Yes.
Yeah, you finally get to hear it
in a full, lush version. Yes.
Great. Yeah, very sweet.
Yeah, it's really great.
We get to go to Lake Town pretty soon now, right? Yeah.
And scene. Here we are.
We get a lot of new material in the next film.
Wonderful. Yeah, this is interesting because this score is one that connects it to Lord of the Rings the most. The next two take on their own personality a bit more in terms of the themes, so that'll be a lot to talk about in those as well.
That was an extraordinary slice of time, and thank you so kindly for your insights, everybody who's been with us on the live chat, all the ladies and gentlemen and Hobbit lads and lasses around the world. Thank you for staying up in different time zones as we explored the music of the Hobbit films. This is the first in a series of 3, obviously. We are entirely behind Doug Adams in his effort to get the publication of the music of the Hobbit films rolling out the door. It needs to happen because, you've already experienced the great awesomeness of the music of the Lord of the Rings films. Get a copy of it if you haven't gotten a copy yet. Follow these folks. Doug Adams Music, and we can also follow you, Jim, and I just tweeted you several times throughout the show. Is it J Ware?
It is Jim J Ware.
It is Jim J Ware. I myself am QuickBeam2000 on Instagram and on Twitter, and my goodness gracious!
Wow, what's happening?
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
That seems to be. They've started the drag races from Venice Beach have now moved over here to Hollywood Boulevard.
Okay.
They're literally drag racing automobiles down the boulevard. You can hear it now.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everyone. This has been so great. And soon we'll make a post on our Facebook, Instagram, and other socials for the OneRing.net when we schedule our next chapter, The Desolation of Smaug. Until then, I wish everyone to stay safe and stay warm and dry at home, and wear your mask. Behave yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. Until then, good night and good luck, or as I often like to say, buenas noches y buena suerte. We'll see you next week at 5 p.m. on Torn.